The House will please come to order. I would like to welcome everybody to the 20th day of the session, the last day of the budget session, Friday, March 8th, 2024. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Please. Convening roll call for March 8th, 2024, the 20th day. Alamand. Allred. Andrew. Angelos. Banks. Bear. Berger. Berger.
Excused.
Brown. Burkhart.
Excused.
Byron. Chadwick. Chestick. Clauston. Conrad. Crago.
Excused.
Davis. Eklund. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hornock.
Excused.
Jennings. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson JT. Lawley. Locke. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Nemec.
Excused.
Northrup. Oakley.
Excused.
Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson.
Excused.
Ottman. Pendergraft. Penn. Provenza.
Excused.
Rodriguez Williams. Sherwood. Singh. Slagle. Smith. Stith. Storer. Strzok. Stivar. Tarver. Trujillo. Walters. Ward. Washut. Western. Winter. Wiley. Yin. Zwanitzer Dan. Zwanitzer Dave. Speaker Summers. Berger. Provenza.
Chief, let's keep that roll open until we get done. All right, the prayer today will be provided by our own Representative Landon Brown. Please rise. You have a privilege first.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, thank you. Unfortunately, I don't see the member in the chamber, but Body, sometimes we can get a little quick and excited when we see friends and family that are here. And last couple 2 days ago, when we had all the firefighters here, I had a very good friend of mine that I met at the base of the stairs, and she had informed me that they were all here to meet with the governor, and asked if I would introduce them on the House floor, and I said absolutely. Come to find out, that was a privilege that was actually asked for, and Representative Hornock had actually invited all of them in here to be here. And I just wanted to publicly apologize, not only to Representative Hornock, since unfortunately he's not here, but to the body as well. That was just a miscommunication. Unfortunately, a very good friend of mine asked me to make an introduction and say hi, and it stole the thunder, unfortunately. So my public apologies to Representative Hornock and to the body. But with that, Mr. Speaker, let us pray. Heavenly Father, we start today by giving thanks to you for all that we're blessed with. Our ability to serve under this prestigious dome, the responsibility that you've instilled in us to carry your word and act accordingly to your word every day. Father, we thank you for these blessings, and we recognize we must carry your word to love each other as thy neighbor more seriously. Our body, our state, and our nation have become more divided, and in Luke 11, you remind us that any kingdom divided by civil war is doomed. A family splintered by feuding will fall apart. We humbly pray for your continued grace and strength. We pray to you for guidance and courage to do what is commanded by you and to live within your word. Heavenly Father, in our last day here, we give thanks to you for the friendships made, safety to those who have traveled, and especially for the health of the family unit at home that has held firm over the past 4 weeks while we've done our duty for our state. Father, as we leave here and return home to our daily lives, we ask for your protection, love, grace, and healing in our hearts. We must remember that we are all imperfect, and your grace is what saves us. Please protect all those that travel home and heal those hearts that harbor any resentment between any brother or sister. We ask for your continued belief in us and your continued grace over us. In your Son's heavenly name, Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Representative Brown. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Hello. The House will please come to order. Try to get everybody in here, and then we'll try to finish roll. Chief, please finish the roll.
Burkhart. Crago. Hornock. Nemec. Oakley.
Excused.
Olson.
Yeah, Chief, let's close the roll there.
61 present, 1 excused.
All right, we're going to just do a quick journal committee report, get that out of the way.
Your journal committee reports that the journal of March 7th, 2024 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Representatives Ward and Chestick.
Next, we're going to do the leadership gifts when Representative Ottman gets back to the mic here. Kind of how we're going to roll is we'll do the leadership gifts, and then the joint CC2, JCC2 will present as kind of as a privilege. We'll present the budget compromise, and then we'll go into a vote on JCC2. So, Representative Ottman, please.
Privilege of the floor.
Please.
Mr. Speaker, in following with the tradition of the Wyoming House, today, as a token of respect for the offices of leadership and to acknowledge those that have served in those positions during the 23-24 session, we, the members of the 67th Wyoming Legislature, would like to present you each with a personally engraved gift. Okay, Majority Floor Leader Chip Nyman. Minority Floor Leader Mike Yin. Speaker Pro Tem, Representative Clark Stith. Good. Majority Whip, Representative Cyrus Western. Minority Whip, Representative Carly Provenza. House Majority Caucus Chair, Representative Jerry Obermueller. House Minority Caucus Chair, Representative Trey Sherwood. You're very welcome. Okay, there's one more, but before that, I just want you to know there is packing for each of those, so you don't have to worry with that. So there's boxes in Carol's office. Yes. Your names and your district and the seals are all on it. So they're engraved for each of you, okay? You're welcome, okay. And last but not least, Speaker of the House, Albert Summers. That was engraved especially and with traditional barn wood, not Walmart wood, okay, and with Speaker's brand. So while his secretary had a most difficult time finding that for us, she did, and we hope that you enjoy it.
It's very nice.
Okay.
I'd like to thank everybody for that. And I want to show you, you all know this, but the general public doesn't. But Carol, the secretary, you know, the leadership secretary, she made this small quilt and then got all of you to sign it, right? So this was made by Carol. And I'm not going to give a big speech. Maybe at the end I'll do a little bit, but I want to thank everybody. And this will be the first of several cries, right? But thanks, everybody. All right, now down to business. How we're going to do this is our good JCC2, accompanied by a fill-in for me who sat there the whole time through the JCC, Representative Sherwood, as she will help explain the budget. And our chairman, Representative Larson, will do this under a privilege so they can kind of be a little more free-flowing. And then obviously we can ask questions and not have to maybe follow all the second reading protocols. And so we'll just kind of go through it. So Chairman Larson.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, privilege of the floor, please.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And damn, Albert, who would have thought? Right? Love you, man. Yeah, okay, folks. I guess first on a higher level, you know, I would just share with you that the opportunity to work with my colleagues and you all on budgets and on appropriations is probably one of the highest honors that I've had in my life, and I appreciate the process. And the Appropriations Committee would just really like to extend our gratitude to you as a body. We know that this process sometimes seems one-sided or confusing or engulfed in fog. It's never the intent for it to be that way. We appreciate your efforts to be engaged and to understand the process better. You know, this year when we was doing budget hearings, Representative Trujillo was there. I bet you 90% of the agency days taking notes after notes, filled volumes of notes, and then asking questions at the end, trying to get a better grasp on this process. We really appreciate those efforts of you in trying to better understand. We appreciate the debate we have on the floor and realize that nobody died and made this committee king overall to dictate how, what, and where we do with the fundings. And so we appreciate the process as it's set up and your participation in doing this. Mr. Chairman, what you're going to find on your desk as a result of the JCC conference report is a one-page document that just shows all of the amendments that were adopted. Now, these were amendments that went through that the Senate adopted and then what we adopted using the Joint Appropriations Committee budget as the baseline document for the conversation. We adopted then additional amendments going through that. And this sheet shows the Senate documents that were adopted by the Joint Conference Committee number 2 and the House amendments. Then accompanying that document is an 18-page stapled document that the front page is the same as the one pager, it shows those, and then if you flip into it, you'll see the various amendments as they were adopted and how they read. Might be worthy of taking home with you as your constituents say, what was with this? You'd be able to have flip to those amendments and look at them. There's also a third document on here that kind of shows you what you'll recall. The CapCon committee bill, the CapCon bill died. We brought the CapCon projects back through on the budget on both sides. This kind of gives a reflection of what was in the original bill, plus what the joint appropriations and the JCC2 committee done, and Representative Walders will get into that conversation more as we go through the explanation of the bill. You'll also find our large summary sheet, and I think y'all have a large one. This will be the document as we start explaining what we adopted and what we deleted in Joint Conference Committee. This will be the document that we go through. Again, would be a pretty good one to use as you reflect back on the 18-pager. Might be worth taking home if your constituents or people from the media ask you questions. You'd be able to reflect on what actions we took. I'd like to, you should also have a white rod, okay, that, and I'd like to, because I think at the end of the day, we're saying, okay, Larson, so what do you do? Where are we at, and how does that impact us? And I'd like to go through that just a little bit and just point out that in our budget stuff here on the floor, moving pennies and around, that we're dealing mostly with general fund dollars. And so if you'd go to page 2 and go down to the bottom of the page on around line 67, you're going to see over there the subtotal. And that first line, it shows $3.7 billion. That's what our general fund appropriation was in the last biennium. So you can compare our actions this year with that 3.7 billion. That next line over, that next column over, is when we finished up with the budget bill on this side and our amendments. The House spending was $4 billion, and if you go on to the next one over, the Senate's position as we went into conference was 3.6. So when we come out and people were talking about a $1 billion difference, this kind of reflects that. Where we ended up at the end in this report that we'll be talking about today is that number on the far right, which is $3.8 billion. And so it's $100 million more than the previous biennium is where we settle out on the general fund dollars for this. And this again is a good one for you to take home and reflect with your constituents and others that might be interested. I would also I'd also point out the total budget. The last biennium, our total budget, sum total, and it's important to remember that when we talk about the total budget, that's not necessarily that we've set funds aside. It's an anticipation of possible expenditures. So it's more authorization to spend funds. In the last biennium, that was 10.3 billion. Okay, overall, this year is 11.5 billion, so $1.2 billion more. Why? I'll go into why the significant increase, but I want to also share with you that in our current biennium, in previous bienniums, and in the one that we move forward, as we talk about these authorizations, there's also, as our LSO staff help us understand, there's about $1.5 billion, $1.3 billion of that that's double counting. What what does that mean? Well, so the state pays for part of the premiums on health insurance, and then they pay the provider their share, and so we count that twice, and that all comes into there. And so each year they point out, they say, yes, those are expenditures or authorizations expenditures, but as you refine that down, and it's what you have to make an accounting for that, but it's just important to understand that about 10% of the increase, maybe even a little more this year, reflects on the increased authorization of federal funds and other funds spending authority. You'll recall in our budget conversations, we said this is to do away with the B11 process. So if the department, pick your department, has a federal fund source and we authorize that, say at 500, and they get more federal funds than that 500, let's say it goes to 600, they can't spend that extra 100 without authorizations. And so during the course of the year, the governor does these B11 actions that authorizes them to use the extra 100. And so we raised a lot of those spending authorities this year in the budget. That accounts for about 10%. We talked about the increase in gaming activity, historic horse racing, other type of gaming activities that we have. We count the payouts as part of our appropriation. So there's about another $30 million that you pay out in gaming. It's really not for the general operations of state government, but we covered in part of that. I think a fair assessment, if you get down and take off all the rough edges, we're probably about 500 million higher this year in actual over the last biennium. I think that would reflect on, I wished we all could say that our businesses or our family are operating the same, on the same budgets that we were 10 years ago. Maybe some of you are, but I would suspect that most of us are not. And the growth of, when you look at the costs of goods and whether that be fuel, whether that be compensation, whether it be the things that state government is involved in, we've increased our budget by that amount. I'd like to have you now turn on this white rod over to page 3, and would like to look at the Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account, the LSRA. You'll see that when last year when we left, we had 1.4 billion in the LSRA. Our actions on the House side, when we got done with all our amendments, we were down to about $1 billion. The Senate side was at about 1.5 billion. Where we ended up at JCC2, as we explain, is we add about 70 million back into the LSRA and grow it a little bit. I'd like to then have you go to on page 5, if you would, and let's look at the. I'd like to just, as an example, look at the savings. On page 5, line 26 is the PMTF reserve account, and you'll recall that we've been focusing on savings, and we've established these reserve accounts, and one of our goals of the Joint Appropriations Committee was to increase our reserve accounts to get to 5x or 5 times the annual spending of each of these accounts, and had plans to do that in this budget. And the reason that we want to do that is we really are starting to realize the power of our savings. Last June, the PMTF reached an all-time high of value of $10 billion. You kind of have to be this JEC junkie, but we were all giddy. That's really That is a huge milestone. Well, let me tell you the power of this is from June to December, in 6 months, that grew another $1 billion. That's what this disciplined savings, this aggressive effort to savings, the revenue now on an additional $1 billion really does help defer the need to do taxes that we would prefer to stay away from, and allows us to continue on as we have an increased budget. It kind of offsets that. Well, our desire to put about $190 million into the PMTF reserve account, we only put in our JCC, in our conference committee, that is reduced down to about 40 million. So we're still less than the 5X, and keep that as a focus moving forward, and hope that this body will help us to reach the full potential of doing that. The 150 that we had hoped to go into the PMTF stayed in the general fund. So lastly, on this white rod, I'd like to have you turn back to page 4. One of the things is the Joint Appropriations Committee, the House Appropriations in particular, met and talked about, this bottom line, is we didn't know what all you guys were doing in your respective bills. And we had these property tax bills out there, and when we've seen impacts of 700 million, that was going to impact the bottom line. How do we do that? And there were times you could hear us all sucking in unison, thinking, oh my, if that happens, that has a significant impact. But if you would look on this page, and this is just an example in the school foundation program, on lines 12, 13, 14, and 15, by the actions on those 3 House bills, 345 and Senate File 54, that decreases revenue coming into the school foundation program. Each one, 2.9, 3.4, and 19.1 million respectively. And then if you'll come down to lines 47, 48, and 50, those are additional impacts on money that we have, in additional funds that we have to take out of the school foundation to backfill local school, that because we're backfilling that in House Bill 345 and 54. So there's about $100 million there. And so the actions of the body, and we just illustrate property tax here because it's been the focus of, one of the focuses of this session. We also further impact what we do in the budget. So, Mr. Chairman, where did we end up then in conversation? We had this gap between the House and the Senate. As we finished our actions yesterday, we ended up a little bit to the House side, but the split was 47.3 to 53 point, so it's basically a 50-50 split, which is historically what the conference committees have tried to do, is try to find middle ground between the House and the Senate positions. Both sides had to compromise. For example, we got CapCon in, but the House had to back away from the Veterans Domiciliary and the Riverton office building renovation while they put some other stuff in. That's part of the negotiation. This budget, you get up in the morning, you decide you're going to have this piece of toast, stick it in the toaster, push it down, and kind of thump around and say, okay, I'll go get the butter. You go get the butter, open the tray. Oh, crap. Didn't get butter out of the freezer. There's just a little bit there, but you think it'll cover that slice of toast, right? And we can make it work. We can make it work, and you're growling at your, Becky, why didn't you get butter out of the fridge? And she's saying, well, why didn't you? And then the toaster pops, and Becky changed the thing on the toast. It comes out really dark. I don't like really dark toast. And so we have this piece of toast there then, and before I put that precious butter, by the way, Mr. Chairman, 3 essential food groups: butter, bacon, and milk, right? And so to conserve the power of this butter, I go there and you scrape all the black that you don't want on off, right? Then you try and make that butter get across that slice of bread the best you can. We had to scrape some black off. And in JCC, those were things that really we said, and we had the conversation, don't belong in the budget bill. Things that were outside, went into the green books, things that didn't do that. And, you know, our good former speaker had all these great ideas in pink and blue that he handed to me, said these are really important. Didn't stay. Important restrictions that felt on the Department of Health and other things didn't stay. There are things that as we're advised in the conference committee, that may have value, but really should come as a policy through a bill. We scraped those off into the sink, and then we took what butter we had left and we tried to get across the piece of bread the best we could. The strengths of that is we were able to restore those previous 3-year cuts in agencies, particularly for social services, for one-time dollars, that ensuring stability to thousands of citizens that receive those services, and for those businesses that provide those services. We funded much of the gap in higher education, funding to community colleges that was long overdue, that as we try to focus the needs on our industries to educate the workforce and the needs that they have. I think the other really important thing that we've done is we continue to provide the governor the ability to be competitive in securing energy projects as we shift from just mining and exporting those services to be value added. How do we attract those value added industries to the state and to provide other jobs? And we're seeing the results of that. And so we provide him the ability to do that in their energy matching funds, but at a reduced. We started at 200 million, didn't have enough butter, we're down at 100. The DD preschools, you know, are down about 4 million. We come in and fund them higher. We do them at 12 million ongoing, which is higher than a one-time appropriation that I can ever recall. But we had in there 16. So there's those type of adjustments as we buttered the toast. So you'll see that reflected, Mr. Chairman and members of the House, as we now start going through this budget bill and understand that I would express also appreciation as a committee chairman of this conference committee to all the members of the House Appropriations Committee, because not only the conference committee members there, but all of the House members were there ready to jump in with the understanding that they had, and that was greatly appreciated. Our Senate side, where we had a very frank, open dialogue without a lot of fluff. It was just, how do we get a budget that moves the state forward? And I, as a chairman, greatly appreciate their efforts in helping us to do that. So, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to invite Representative Sherwood up to start taking us through, and we'll be using this sheet. And you'll really want to pay attention over here in JCC action. A means that we adopted. D means that we deleted. Adopted and further amends we adopted that amendment, then we added language. And if you see blue language in the commentary over there, that's language that was unique to the Joint Conference Committee. That was a free committee, and we had the flexibility to adjust budgets and language outside the normal staying between positions. You'll also see a DFA, delete, further amend, that you delete and then you further amend language. So, Mr. Chairman, with that understanding, perhaps the members of the committee can add clarity to what I've attempted to illustrate and turn the time over to them.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I think what would be best as each presenter is done, then if the body has questions on that, we'll do it that way. So as each presenter gets done, we'll take some questions from the floor. So Representative Sherwood?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, and happy Friday, everyone. I have the great privilege of bringing the things that, again, we agreed on and that were identical. And so if you'll follow along with me on the sheet, and please stop me if I'm going too fast, or yes, please ask questions, because we do very much want you to be able to use this resource to go back to your communities and answer questions that your constituents might have about the budget. So the first items that were identical here were in regards to a feasibility study for dementia training for law enforcement and first responders. And so you'll see that we adopted the Senate's amendment, so the Senate's language, and then deleted the House amendment. So even though these were identical, we still have to go through the process of adopting one and deleting another. So adopt and delete. And then number 3 and 4, so the Senate's amendment was deleted, the House amendment was deleted and further amended, and this was in support of FERNRPA. So we have money going to help our counties enhance the capacity to protect our state and local natural resources from federal government action. And then the language in blue, again, was added by JCC 2, just to clarify that it's of the appropriation. So that's clarifying language there. Number 5 and 6, we adopted the Senate's language regarding keeping ag in the classroom as part of the standard budget. Number 7 and 8, we deleted the Senate amendment, adopted the House amendment for the Department of Health for trauma designation and education. 9 and 10, we adopted the Senate's language regarding the deletion of tourism funds for the Rose Parade. Number 11 and 12, we deleted the Senate's language, adopted the House's language regarding state matching funds to the University of Wyoming to support excellence in research regarding range and rangeland management. Number 13 and 14, we adopted the Senate's language, deleted the House amendment regarding permitting the Office of Administrative Hearings to provide services to our community colleges. Again, this was no money, it was just a clarification. Number 15 and 16, we deleted the Senate amendment, adopted the House's regarding gaming, a study to help us identify gaps that may exist in our laws that affect the security, integrity, or fairness of our gaming activities. Line 17 and 18, we adopted the Senate's language regarding school capital construction for a charter school leases in Laramie County and Natrona County. Number 19 and 20, so we deleted the Senate's language, adopted the House's language regarding reversions to prior appropriations. And this was a technical correction to make sure that the allocation was divided equally between the state water pollution control and state drinking water revolving loan accounts. And that will help those accounts both work harder. Numbers 21 and 22, we adopted the Senate's language regarding the restoration of the Wyoming Spanish-American War Monument. And if you want a little chuckle, the name of this monument, his name is Willie, and he had been lost and wandering and now is found, and this allocation helps restore him. Okay, Wandering Willie. So I'm glad you guys are awake. Number 23 and 24 is regarding the authorization for the governor to reimburse the cost of suppressing fires that may burn on state lands that are managed by our military department. So we deleted the Senate amendment, adopted the House's amendment. 25 and 26, we adopted the Senate's language regarding permitting the state shooting complex oversight task force to use the existing appropriation to hire consultants to assist in those efforts, which I look forward to being able to go and use that facility when it's up and ready. And then I'll pause if there are any questions.
Are there any questions on the mirror amendments? Not. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to walk through page 2, and really there's not much to it. The first 2 items are all technical corrections. That's 27 and 28. So there's no change and so part of what we're doing is just, it's a concept of really going through a balanced budget, right? Or a line item, correcting and deleting. And so a lot of this is going to be kind of boring, right? So the first two are kind of boring. We didn't really, they're just technical corrections. And then the next one, 29, that's just to delete the Senate amendment that had to do with effectiveness of the Department of Transportation. We just deleted that. Then the next four all had to do with what we're going to do with our good friends to the south of us, Texas and the border wall and those type of things. Eventually, if you go down to 33, we're going to send $750,000 to law enforcement personnel from the state of Wyoming to be able to go down and train and be part of that essentially growing and the experience of our law enforcement. And that's what all those do. And then if you go down to 34, that's the other important one. That's 5.5 million, and that has to do with having the right equipment for the response for hazardous materials and homeland security. And then the next two, you might recall we had what the Secretary of State could bring a lawsuit or not, and then we added in everyone else, the other four electeds could do it. So we just deleted both of those, all of them, so that basically all of that went away. So that's literally all we do on that page.
Would anybody like to ask any questions on that page? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the good chairman, I just am asking, when House Bill 1 left this body, we had 3 million going to border security from two different amendments. It looks like we still have 2 million and also 750,000. Is that correct? We have 2,750,000, or is it a different number? I know they're going to different purposes, as were the two different amendments that we passed in this body.
Chairman Nicholas.
So the answer is we had 1 million out of our side. They had 2 million on their side. And our compromise, because it was an open committee, we could go beyond 1 million or 2 million. And so we reduced it down to 750,000.
Anybody else further? Anybody else? All right, who's next? Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're now on page 3. And as a nice little kind of cheat on this, you'll see, like, are my eyes playing tricks on me, or why does the font look lighter? So everything that's sort of in this faded gray are things that we deleted and removed. So anything that still looks bold and bright, like 41 and 44, are still in the budget bill. So that's just a nice little way to look at this quickly. So again, 37, we deleted. This removed the language that would limit our top officials from using any state funds in litigation outside of our state. Number 36 here, we deleted this. And this is I'm actually really sad about this, so I hope we bring it back. But we deleted the authorization for the state treasurer to invest in bonds through the Wyoming Community Development Authority to finance loans for first-time home buyers. So that's gone. Number 39, we deleted regarding the state treasurer and changing the source of funds for investment in mortgages. So those were mirror languages in the House language. Excuse me, that was in addition to that first amendment. Number 40, we delete. This was the Senate amendment regarding the military department, but then we adopted the language in 41 regarding the land swap. So we clarified here that the exchange of lands will continue, move forward with OSLI, but that the transfer will go from the school foundation program account to the common school permanent fund reserve account. So that's in blue. Again, that means that that's a change that was made in JCC 2. Number 42 was deleted, House amendment regarding the Attorney General to investigate mailers that failed to comply with our Wyoming statutory requirements. Number 43, we deleted, this is the House amendment to the Attorney General to investigate cold cases. My understanding is that bill did make it through, though. Number 44, we deleted and further amended. This is in regards to the Arboretum. And so that amount was decreased from 5 million to 3.5 million. Number 45, we deleted. This was a Senate amendment regarding the state engineer, the Board of Control, in terms of whether or not this money was going to come out of general fund or the revenue, other funds, so Water One. Let's see. And then number 47, 48, the language regarding a match requirement was deleted in terms of the funds to the Wildlife and Natural Resources Trust for invasive plants and grasses. And with that, if there are any questions on page 3, I will pause.
Representative Sherwood, are you going to do the next line on the next page to kind of clean up that whole issue of the?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So if you flip over on page 4, the rest of the decision regarding the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust, the 5 million was reduced to 4 million. So then now in the bill, there's a total of 9 million for us to combat the invasive cheatgrass. Thank you.
Right, Representative Ward on pages 3 or the top of page 4, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm looking at page 3, line number 37. It says we deleted agency numbers 3, 4, and 206, stating that they can't use funds to engage in litigation outside the state. But did we also delete the one referring to agency number 2, Secretary of State?
Mr. Chairman, yes. So again, this is a
Please go
hanger. So if
ahead.
you go to page 2, and the Secretary of State is on line 35 and 36. So so walk with me through here. 35 is in bold, so adopt. That means we adopted the Senate amendment that deleted the language that restricted the Secretary of State. Thank you for the question.
Representative Hornock?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question on item 44. So we're, just for clarity, how does this work? Because there was a bill that did not go through, which would have turned this facility over to the state. So this facility is not turned over to the state. It is still in the hands of the municipality and others right now. But so essentially, are we allocating funds and AWAC positions for a facility to do work at a facility that the state doesn't even control? I'm curious how this is going to work to put $3.5 million into something that, you know, we had a bill that did not work its way through the process that would have
Got it.
put this on. I'm curious.
Chairman Larson.
Thank you. That's correct. The bill that would have turned this over to under complete control of the state parks did fail, but the state parks also has MOUs with other entities around the state on state parks. In my good town, there's a state park that's up the canyon where things sink away, that where the big fish live is all owned by the city of Lander, and the state parks has funds that help maintain that and oversee that, even though they don't own them. And this is a similar exercise that that we've entrusted state parks to help preserve this historic arboretum here in this part of the world. You'll recall we had come out of it come out with 5 million, and then that was further reduced down to 2.5, but we've had that in the budget bill, and it's been there all along, but it'll be with that state agency.
Chairman Eklund?
Mr. Speaker, I guess the question I've got is on item number 38. This came as an amendment from I believe our revenue chairman, and it just seemed like a great idea. I think all of us are aware the economy is just really a mess. If you're young people trying to get going with buying a home, which will be maybe the main way our kids can start building wealth. This, it's been eliminated. I'd like to know what the conversation was and what the interest was, because all in all, I don't think this would cost us much. I know it's low interest, like 3.5 interest loans, and maybe the 15 million wouldn't have amounted to much, but it would have maybe set a framework. We could see how that would work. Was there much of an interest, and do we have other funds that are probably yielding less than 3.5? Last I knew we did. We had some that might have been almost underwater a couple of years ago, but could
Representative
anybody
Sher-
expound on it?
Representative Sherwood, would you like to answer that question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, this was an arm wrestling match that I lost. But as I said, I am optimistic that we can continue to have dialogue around what we do for affordable housing and workforce housing in the state. I do think there's some interim topics coming to this point. But yes, this was a compromise that we made.
Chairman Larson? Okay, I think we still got questions, so I thought you may have some further.
So again, as we kind of scraped off the black off the toast, anything that looked like it should have been its own separate bill, this kind of fit into that fill. Not all, you're still going to see a couple of sections that we didn't get scraped off as good as we had liked, but for the most part, if it was another bill, we'd done it.
Representative Yen?
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I think I also wholeheartedly agree with the good chairman of Ag, and I'm hoping that we see housing as an interim topic for at least one of our committees, and we take that conversation up in there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Bear?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a question on line 44. This was discussed a moment ago, and it was discussed during the budget debate on this floor, but we've now agreed upon 3.5 million for 2 years, so roughly 1.75 million per year to maintain the Arboretum. Just curious, is there a contribution from this municipality that maintains ownership? What is the annual budget to operate the Arboretum? And therefore I can figure out how much we're paying of that annual budget.
So thank you for the question. The answer is we don't know.
Chairman Nicholas?
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. We don't know what the annual budget is, because the first thing that we're doing is saving the facility. So these are the basic dollars basically to save the buildings and save the trees that are out there, roughly 750 trees that were planted 100 years ago. And the community that we're now has offered to have one full-time employee and contribute roughly 1.5 million in addition to these funds in order to undertake this project. What happens in the future will be up to this legislature 2 years from now. Basically, this is what we can do to try to save this facility.
Anybody else on this page? If not, Chairman Larson?
Mr. Chairman, before we switch over the page, if I could just have everybody look at 41. That's the military, where we go up and we spend $15 million to pay for a lease to move state land, right? So that's a $15 million appropriation from our general fund, but where's it going to? Over to this hand, coming back into the school foundation. And so there's some of that. It looks like it's an appropriation, but it's really going from one pocket to the other pocket in the state. It's because there's school trust lands that we're paying the lease on, then it'll come into the school reserve account. So kind of bear that in mind a little bit as we go along. So Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd flip over the page and we'll go on page 4, starting at the good chairman, or we'll start on 50 and 51. As I mentioned earlier, that was language that was put on to the Department of Health that, along with other language throughout the bill, that really that was removed, which put restrictions on how the department could use funds. The footnote, or number 52, might be a bit of the dark crumbs that didn't get scraped off the toast, but we kept the restriction on the Department of Health's Phase 1 demolition at the Wyoming State Hospital to not take down some buildings that were identified as buildings of interest for that community. 53, we adopted the House positions on funding the DD preschools at $12 million, but we changed that. On the House side, we had that as school foundation money, and we adopted the Senate's position as moving that to general funds. 54, 55, 56. On 54, that was an amendment that came from over on this side of that would have raised the DD preschools from with an additional $4 million. The 55 was $1 million that went into the Wyoming Home Services. That position was changed in conference committee and removed. That was a strong Senate position. We had an amendment on the House side that brought in an additional $314 million. I believe it was a divided amendment coming from this side of the House that put $314,000 into the senior citizens for grants. We removed that, and we would just remind the body that in joint appropriations, we added $200,000 to that account. So that was the larger reason for removing that. And 57 relates to number 50 and 51, where on restrictive language in the Department of Health, that was deleted. Items 58 and 59 were amendments on the House side that adjusted reimbursement to foster families and our providers to adolescent services, our crisis beds, RTCs, BOCES, to 100% of the rebasing. You'll recall in the conversation, the governor had funded 75% of what the rebasing request was. This body, the House, in 2 different amendments, raised that up to the full rebasing amount, and we adopted that. 60 and 61. 60 is an interesting one. That was 2 different amendments on this side on the summer school lunch program. Senate was strongly against that. We conceded and feel that that's a conversation that we need to continue on with. 60, 61, 62 is a sad day in Mudville. We got rid of the greatest amendment where we done away with the Mammoth Jacks. We had a brief moment of silence in that conversation just to had. We had in the budget bill on item 54, we had a in the budget bill, we talked, we want to have the Oil and Gas Commission do ongoing major maintenance of that building in Casper. That was removed out on the Senate side, then put back in. We just deleted all of their language and stayed with the Joint Appropriation Committee bill. And that also relates to item 65 on page 5. We defeated, or
Chairman Larson, do you want to take questions on that last page?
yeah, thank you, I do.
Anybody have questions on
Tom?
page 4? Representative Hornock?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Chairman. Question on 64 and 65. Could you,
We kept it in. That's what I think.
so these, just a question, these were both deleted out of the footnote then, so the major maintenance push is not in the budget.
Mr. Chairman?
Please
So-
go ahead, Representative Larson.
So the genesis for the conversation, Representative, was when the Oil and Gas Commission came with their budget. They were requesting some major authority to spend some of their own funds for major maintenance on one component that needed to be replaced. And they've been doing that. And the question was asked of them, do you have a major maintenance program? And do you allocate a portion of your own funds to make sure that building has ongoing major maintenance? The response to that was no, they do not. And so in the budget bill, we have a footnote that requires them to develop a major maintenance program. The Senate had stripped that out and then added it back in. We just delete all their language and leave the language requiring that in the bill.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to page 5 then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We deleted the amendment that would have taken $2 million out, and we keep $2 million in the budget for the celebration of the 250th birthday of our nation. On item 57, we've deleted and further amended.
Chairman Larson, could you maybe identify what those 2 million, what the funds were out of, so people know?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would be happy to, and apologize for neglecting that. That is not a general fund appropriation. That's out of the tourism account. And it was, that's what the S14 is. Also, out of the Office of Tourism, we allocated $500,000, you'll recall, to entice or help the community to the north of us here a ways to attract the ongoing national air race. Since our actions on the floor, it has come to our attention that there's a private entity that is willing to substantially donate to that if we could generate matching funds. And so we added in 2.5 million that would be required to, as best possible, for matching funds to help with that effort. On items 68 and 69, we deleted House third reading Amendment 51 and Senate third reading in the Office of Tourism, which would have a comprehensive feasibility study. Then we get into the University of Wyoming, which you'll recall was, we had quite a bit of conversation, and that conversation didn't get any less in the conference committee. There was an effort to make the University of Wyoming's budget similar to what we have other state agencies. We deleted that Senate amendment and keep that budget as it currently is. Then we had items 70 and 71, which were arguably the crumbs on the toast that we could have scraped off. We did the one on the gender study, but we allowed the one on diversification, equality, inclusion to stay in place. So we adopted that. That was That was a strong conversation on the Senate that we deliberated on in consultation with the university and adopted 71. We deleted the Senate third reading amendment number 5 that for the and 73 that was money going to the Wyoming Family Medical Residency. We deleted that. We deleted 74, which was to require the University of Wyoming to work with an ag entity up in the Bighorn Basin on crop certification. The university is well on its way to getting that resolved, and was probably one of those things that didn't belong in the budget bill. Item 75 was an amendment from the greatest proponent we have for medical education on this side of the body, that was looking for residencies or positions at other medical schools to expand the opportunity for medical education. We deleted that. On the next, so Mr. Chairman, maybe we could take questions on that page.
Yeah, do you want to finish UW? Maybe we'll just finish UW on the next page for the next 3 items.
Thank you,
and then
Mr.
we'll-
Chairman.
Representative Ottman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Speaker. Just a point of clarification. When the other representative was talking, she said the light gray, and then we have delete, but we have footnotes. So if you could just clarify for me, if it's deleted from the budget, there's a D, but if it's a light gray, then it's an added footnote or something? If you could, thank
Chairman
you.
Larson.
Thank you, and that really is a great question. So it's specific to the amendment. Does the amendment go into the budget bill, or is it removed from the budget bill? And so if the light gray and there's a delete, that amendment as it is written will not impact is not impacting the budget bill. For example, if we had $1 million in there to help Lloyd bake cookies, and there was an amendment to remove that out, and that was adopted by the House side, then we go to conference committee and we delete that amendment. That means that amendment died, and the $1 million for Lloyd's still in the budget. So you have to kind of take the action, attach it to the amendment, and see how that impacts the budget.
So the light colored are deletions. The dark colors are adoptions or delete and further adopt, so. Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, back on amendment number 68 on page 5. Just real quick, I wanted to kind of get the committee's thought. I mean, I done about 20 of these budget negotiations, so I appreciate the pressure you're under, and this one's probably unique. But this 150,000, which was really this, if you've ever been, there is a state veterans museum. It's the state of Wyoming's Veterans Museum. It's in the officers club at the old Army Air Base, where about 18,000 people were trained on B-17s and B-24s. Quite a facility. And so, you know, the director of the Department of Parks, director of the military department, and also the tourism director all work together on this. And this is 150,000 out of not general funds. Like, I mean, you go back to the Arboretum number, I guess I'm on 68, but 44 is the Arboretum at $3.5 million general fund. And I just wonder, I mean, 150,000 out of the tourism projects account, which this body created to be used for that kind of stuff. Why was 150,000? Because I think this facility is the only one like it. There's not many left in the country, and it is our state veterans museum, which honors our veterans, to take this to the next level right along the Yellowstone Highway. And so I just wondering the thoughts of, I guess I see this as 3.5 million for an Arboretum, which I love that history too. We should preserve it. I support it 100%. But I think this other history piece with our Wyoming's Veteran Museum. So I'm just wondering kind of the trade-off on the thinking on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that's my first guy. I got a second one on witchy whammy after that. Thank you.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In answering that question regarding the trade-off between why we did one for an arboretum versus this, we're struggling to explain to our colleagues from down the hall why we needed to do a feasibility study for a facility that's already established. Because in the amendment, it said for the establishment of a Veterans Museum. And that's where the confusion came in, because the Veterans Museum is already there, and we were unable to convince our colleagues down the hall that we needed to do a feasibility study to establish something that was already established. There was also a little concern that using tourism dollars on a feasibility study wasn't the right funding source, and that it probably should have been general funds, because those tourism dollars, it was felt by our friends down the hall, should be utilized for promotion of the state of Wyoming, not for feasibility studies for things like that. Again, we lost a few arm wrestling matches. I'm not saying this was the House position. I'm just describing where those negotiations were going, and this was one of those arm wrestling matches. We were unable to convince our colleagues from down the hall that this was something we needed to be doing, and so our apologies from the conference committee. We won some, we lost some, and this was one, unfortunately, we were unable to convince our colleagues from down the hall that it should move forward. So thank you for the question, and we'll keep trying on that one.
So Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question on item 67. So it's my understanding that this amendment would have appropriated $500,000 to see if we could get an air race. But what has happened in the Joint Conference Committee, and I don't see a Senate side position on this amendment, I just see that there has been an automatic increase of $2 million to this appropriation. So rather than negotiating into middle ground, there was the addition of $200 million, which seems to me like that's putting all of the black back on the toast. And so can you please explain how the Joint Conference Committee just is able to add $2 million to an amendment that was not there to begin with?
Chairman Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my first response would be nothing's automatic. And the second thing I would share with you is the structure of this committee. Typically, when you go into a committee, you've got to stay within the positions of the two sides. That committee was dismantled. A free committee is established. Once a free committee is established, we could have gone back into any of the agency's standard budgets and redone that. The dark blue on this portion represents the action of the Joint Conference Committee. The recommendation to provide the matching funds came from the Senate. And it's a matching fund, and the House agreed with it.
Chairman Harshman, if you're going to page 6, wait till we do the explanation on page 6, if that was where you were headed.
Mr. Speaker, I think you already did on the witchy whammy. You haven't?
No,
Sorry, Mr. Speaker.
we got cut off by another question before that happened. So Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question again is line 67 with the air races. Again, I had the same question the previous speaker brought up about this incredible increase. I understand it's for matching funds, so if this were completely matched, we'd be at $5 million for the air races at the airport that we anticipate, which is in the center of the state. I've had a few discussions with people who work in this area and are familiar with the races, and they're telling me, based on the proximity of the airport to homes, that this race would be restricted to one class. That's the T6 aircraft. So I'm curious, did the committee take anything into account as far as the fact that this may only be able to run part of the races, and then other cities are going to have to deal with the faster aircraft, which are going to go on a wider racetrack, if you will. Just want to know if there was information taken as to what this would cost. We are, with matching funds, looking at $5 million. And what would that $5 million be spent on?
Representative Walters?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The biggest reason for the increase was from the time that we concluded our budget amendments here on the House floor to when the Open Joint Conference Committee was meeting. There was a public announcement that the city in the center of the state is one of 3 finalists with the opportunity to host the entirety of these air races. If these air races do not end up in the state of Wyoming, none of these funds get spent. And remember, these are tourism funds. That when this race was being held in the state, a couple states south of us, it had a $100 million annual impact. So we see this as a great opportunity to bring big dollars to the state of Wyoming, if and only if Wyoming is selected. And if Wyoming's not selected, the dollars stay right where they are, and there's no concern in that regard. Another perspective to think about this, the large rodeo that takes place right here in this city does $40 million in economic impact. So if you say these air races have the opportunity to do even that much in economic impact, the $2.5 million of tourism dollars being spent in this regard for $40 million of annual impact is a pretty good rate of return. And again, the increase came about because new information came up from the time we finished our deliberations here on the House floor to when this Open Conference Committee met, and that was the reason behind it, and felt that it was a good way to try and generate future revenue sources for the state of Wyoming. And so that was the information that came in, and again, maybe it gets selected, maybe it doesn't, but we're trying to put Wyoming's best foot forward to create that large economic impact.
Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question regarding item number 69, regarding our land grant university. Doesn't look like there was an appropriation for this. Just curious why JCC did not want a transparent and detailed budget request from our land grant university.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When this budget amendment came out from the Senate side, we went back and done some research on the budget process. There's a pretty detailed budgeting LSO document that was drafted in 2003 that went back and looked at the history of the budgeting process for the University of Wyoming. At one time, decades ago, they had a budgeting process similar to what our state agencies do and have, and there was kind of 2 conversations that went on. One is what's the role of the Board of Trustees for the university in determining what the budget is, and then what portion of that budget, as the university continued to grow and expand in the research and other types of services, does the state legislature want to sit down and be as prescriptive as they had been previously. It was one of the previous governors that really, around 1999, that really started the conversation of looking more at a block grant like we do with our K-12 model that seemed to be more appropriate for the university. That was adopted, I think, in 2000, if memory serves me correct, and we've maintained that and have felt that is the legislature has adopted that and has felt comfortable. There's always conversations on how the university spends money, but for the budgeting process, the conference committee, after researching that, felt that this current system was the best approach. Then secondly, is if we are going to change the budgeting, that really should come in the form of a bill to develop the policy and say that from henceforth, and that's kind of how it happened previously, but henceforth, if we're going to require that, we ought to have that conversation more in depth and maybe in an interim committee and then bring it before the floor. So that was kind of the conversation. So, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you. And just to clarify, the University of Wyoming has probably the most transparent budget in all of state government. So if you can track every dollar and every dime, and they go through about 3 months of budgeting processes and open public meetings. So it's all there. So the idea that somehow it's not transparent is fundamentally incorrect.
Mr. Chairman, if we.
Vice Chair Larson.
Thank you. I think we're on page 6, and I think we're on that item that the good former speaker was talking about, which is on WICHE. You'll recall that in the budget bill, we raised the WICHE in the general fund, restoring a step 2 cut, and then adding a little bit, brought it up to about $750,000. The good chairman brought in a budget that amendment that increased that by 1.3 million, and with some further language. How we got to, in joint conference committee, how we got to the 250,000 of that, we reduced that 1.3 down to 250, was just at the end of the day, as we looked at overall, how do we get into the middle on our conversations? This is one of the areas that still trying to increase some and maintain that. For example, we reduced the mental health stuff that you'll see later on. There's a $15 million assets come down now to 10. We funded $40 million into the 988 hotline that we've reduced down to 10 million, but keeping it funding. That's just where we felt like we had to be to get this budget acceptable to both sides.
Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. And so the number really in my head, it goes from maybe 10 doctor training, 10 new docs, which we used to train more than 20 folks, back in the 70s and 80s when we turned down establishing our own medical school. That's another subject. But my question, Mr. Chairman, this 250,000, it takes it down to a couple docs. Is it just WICHE contracts, or is the other language still in there? I don't see it crossed out where it could be maybe a expanded WWAMI opportunity if one opens there, or with other universities that we used to have contracts with. So, or is it just WWAMI? or WICHE? Thank you.
Vice Chair Larson.
Mr. Chairman, it is just the funding of WICHE, and it raises the overall amount from the 700, so we're just right around $1 million, but the language didn't change. So then, folks, we're on item 79, the feasibility study for generic drugs. We deleted. That was a House second reading amendment. We adopted the Senate third reading amendment, which reduced $2 million and deleted in the Wyoming Business Council, the Economic Development Laboratory. Likewise, we deleted $8 million that would be able for infrastructure improvements. We talked about this, the infrastructure improvements, and we also talked about some other things, but the Business Council can do that. They don't need our permission to do that. They could already fund this one. We deleted a second reading amendment requiring them to report on federal dollars. We deleted in 83 and 84. In 85 are all of the amendments regarding the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. That commission is now a state agency, and we came to the Appropriations Committee with a new budget, and there were efforts to delete that. We kept that in place. Then going down to 86 on the Department of Education, we done away with the study on the early childhood education. They could do that now without us telling them to do it. Same way on the statewide status of suicide prevention. And then the last one on page 88, where you'll recall that we put a couple of positions in Department of Education. And in this motion, we adopted the Senate's position where the superintendent will be required to decrease one position and its funding, or just one position, no funding attached.
Any other questions on that page? If not, is it Representative Walters next on page 7?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are on page 7, friends, starting at item number 89. And this just states that we adopted House Third Reading Amendment number 27. And this is for applied agriculture and farm programs and making them part of the standard budget going forward. Item 90 is House Second Reading Amendment 12, and this is in regards to the Wyoming Gaming Commission, and it increases it by $350,000 and 1 FTE, as well as 1 FTE for an executive secretary for the commission for the period of a year. Those are in special revenue funds that are generated by the Gaming Commission. Moving on to item number 91, this is House Second Reading Amendment number 13 and the in the Wyoming Gaming Commission. Again, this is $343,000 of their own dollars for 5 AWACS for staffing on race day and operations on race day at these tracks. And that's in regards as well to item number 92, House Third Reading number 28, which makes those race day staffing folks available immediately. And the reason for that is we'll have races kicking off in May and early June. So we needed to make sure those staff were there and AWAC positions available to make sure there's good, proper, safe operations on the track, again, paid for by Gaming Commission dollars. Moving on to item number 93, 94, and 95, and 96. All of these are in regards to capital construction in the state of Wyoming. And I think that this time the easiest might be if you go to the state CapCon summary sheet that was passed out. I'll just give you a high level of what is in this bill, and it's all addressed in, again, 93, 94, 95, and 96, but it'll be quickest to just run through this summary sheet on state CapCon. We'll have 17 million SIPA for contingency to the State Building Commission. We will do 4 million in the military department, all federal funds, or excuse me, 4.8 for the entry at Guernsey Military Department, FE Warren Power, 51 million, again, federal funds, authorization only. State construction, doing level 1 and level 2 studies throughout the next year for 1.75 million. We removed, and that's why it's stricken and in green on this summary sheet, CapCon summary sheet, the state office building in Riverton renovation that would have been 8 million SIPA, that was removed. We removed the Department of Health Veterans Home remodel, 69 million. And I want to pause on that for just a moment. The application is still in for the state of Wyoming. We did that a year ago, approved the money to do the 70% federal, 30% state funding for that project. So that application is still in. Hopefully in the next year or two will be approved and we can come back and authorize the federal dollars and get the project going. So this was just going to allow for the state to pay the entire project and then hope to be reimbursed. So we're still moving on that. We're just moving on that at a much slower pace than we would have been had we approved the $69 million. Moving on to the boys' school, 1.5 million for demolition and replacement of a storage facility at the boys' school. The $1 million for the CWC I skipped one, the Stoltz Hall. This is a separate one. This was number 94 on our conference committee summary sheet, but this is going to go ahead and move forward $37 million here. But we're splitting the funding source. 25 million of that will be from reversions in the current biennium, and then the remaining 13 million will come from SIPA. Then moving on to the CWC Jackson Center, that's $1 million. That's just reallocating the previous appropriation there. Moving on to then the NZ building, that's authorization only for 33.3 million. Then we have OLSI, the Helibase for 7.5 million to construct a Helibase facility. Then we have spending authority for state parks are the next four there. That's spending authority only on those. Then we get down to the Department of Health demo and replacement. This is previously appropriated funds, just clarifying the language to allow for them to demo and construct a new storage building. There was some concern with the previous language that they could do the demo, but possibly not the construction of the new building. So that's no new expenditure, just some language change there. Then we move on down to the Riverton State Office Building Authorization. There was some funding a year ago. This just allows those dollars to carry forward and be utilized. Then we move down to the next item, and this is 10.3 million. This reverts that general fund backstop that we had in place for the CWC Jackson Outreach Center. That facility has been approved as an ARPA eligible project, and those funds will be expended on that facility from ARPA versus general fund. So this allows us to revert that money back into the state. Then we have the next two items. This is the Gillette Community College District transferring of property from the city or from the Northern Community College District to the new Gillette Community College. And then there's a new item on the bottom of that list, and that's for 2.5 million SIPA for a community rec center in Fremont County. So those are the CapCon projects. Again, I just think it's easier to reference that summary sheet versus the way it's laid out on the summary CapCon sheet versus the way it's laid out in the summary Joint Conference Committee report. So then moving on to item number 97. And this is really, I would call it technical in nature. It's budget balancers. So because of our changes in the capital construction, there won't need to be as large of a transfer from the general fund to SIPA. So that's the first reduction we make. The next one is making the transfers from to the LSRA. We just make sure those are coming in at the end of the biennium as opposed at the end of each fiscal year. That just allows us to keep cash on hand until the end in case there is a drastic downturn in the economy of some kind. It just creates flexibility. And then the final item there, it's just to be between the two positions and to make sure we had all our bases covered, really based on what the floor action might be in other bills. And so even as short as 3 or 4 days ago, we had several $100 million in other legislation that the floors had been working on. And so we needed to make sure we have enough money to cover all of that action, not floor action on amendments to the budget, but other actual bills out there. Now that we're coming to the waning days of the session, we have a better idea of that, and that's why we know that we shouldn't need any more than $100 million to make sure we maintain our 5% of the general fund revenue balance in the budget reserve account, which is what we always strive to maintain, and that's at $152.5 million. So that's item 97. Then item number 97A. So you're going to notice we've inserted a few of these in here because they're related, and so this is a reduction in the amount that we will transfer from the general fund to the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund reserve account. We had hoped to be able to do about $190 million to that PMTF reserve account, and the way our revenue or our funds are working out, we'll be able to do $40 million to that reserve account this biennium. And so that is page 7. Happy to take any questions on page 7.
Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A question on, it's in item 93. On the spreadsheet, it's the last item, number 340. I'd just like a little more information and clarification. It seems, again, this is another item that suddenly appears in capital construction, and it goes to a very specific project, which, you know, we discuss a lot in this body. I know that this town that we're currently in has looked at building a rec center for a long time and working on different funding mechanisms for that. In this situation, can you just explain why the state is on the hook for this rec center, and will this be a state building, or will this be controlled by, I guess, Riverton City, Fremont County? Just where did this come from, and what was the need for doing this brand-new project? This wasn't in any of the previous capital construction items as we discussed through this entire, budget process.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, Joint Conference Committee number 2 is what is known as a free committee, so have the flexibility to go anywhere. There really are no side rails. We tried to keep it narrowed down. I would note that when we brought in what was House Bill 135, I believe, which was the capital construction bill that was not introduced, this project was in that original capital construction bill that was brought before the body. It was actually in there at 3.5 million, so this project is at a lower dollar value. It is anticipated that it must be matched at a 1-to-1 match, and then it has to be done that match has to come in fairly quickly as these dollars revert within 2 years. So if the community isn't able to come up with the funding to match that 2.5 million within 2 years, the dollars come back. To the question of ownership, the ownership would be the city or however they structure it. The state is just, in this instance, offering to partner with them to complete the project. But again, because it was as we call it, a free committee, we could go outside of those bounds, but I would also say this was not a new idea. This was an idea that was in the original capital construction budget that was presented on this floor earlier in the session.
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a quick question on the CapCon here on the rundown sheet. There's an item for the boys' school demolition of storage, roughly 1.6. I'm going to be there next week, and I'm kind of curious as somebody that's in construction, why it costs 1.6 million to take down a building. So if you could, and it doesn't have to be answered right here, right now, but if somebody could tell me what building that is, thank you.
Chairman Larson.
Thank you. And that's demolition and construction. So, okay, and as you pull in, yeah, both demolition and construction as you pull into the campus, and you come up the parking lot and you see where the main campus is. It's the old maintenance shop where they keep their welding and storage and stuff in there.
Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a follow-up question regarding the Fremont County Rec Center budget bill section on the CapCon. Just curious, is that just for the construction? Does that include land? Is this an ice rink project that we had seen last biennium that was in the budget, a budget request? And then I just have a question regarding the process of, what was it called, a free committee, open committee? When these items come up to be considered for the budget, our new items come up, do they directly come from JCC members, or members of the body allowed to submit requests to members of JCC? Just curious how that looks.
Chairman Larson, why don't you take the last question, and then the office building question we'll put back to Representative Walters.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. The conference committee is designed, the motions have to be made by the members of that committee. Now, in fairness, as well, as I noted earlier, once you're in a free committee, game's on kind of per se. One of the first actions we took in the conference committee was to not go back into each individual. Well, actually, we said, are there any needs to go back into any of the agency budgets? And so per your question, if there had been an agency director or a constituent or something that had identified something and said, gee, I wish we'd have been able to get that in the budget, and identified that then you were in a free committee, could have made that argument to a member of that committee, and if it had validity, the committee member certainly had the ability to make a motion in that regard. But it's opened up, and so the first thing we done is ask that question. Then we made a motion not to go into any more of the budgets, and then we adopted this committee bill as the basis of what the committee would make its motions on, and then we allowed more flexibility with the amendments and the proposals that came out. Mr. Chairman, I'd just also note, going back to House Bill 138, which was the original CAPCON bill, where this recreation center, which is, as I understand the project, has expanded past last year's concept of an ice rink, and does, I think the whole idea, as I've heard from the community, is there is funding in place for land, and these matching funds just gets them to that end project of construction. But in that House Bill 138, that was in there for 3.5. When that died and the House Appropriations Committee put it in the budget bill, you'll recall that there were a number of items of the capital construction bill that we did not bring in. There was some stuff from Eastern Wyoming College. There was the training and shooting range at the peace officer training. This recreational center, we did not put in the budget bill. It was important on the Senate side. They're the ones that brought it forth, and we lost that.
Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appreciate some of this clarification. I'm asking for a little more clarification on item 97A, the budget balance transfer from the general fund to the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund. And curious, why is it that we lost $100 million to put into the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund? It sure would be nice to continue building that reserve, as we discussed earlier, that it's a great avenue for funding for this state, but seems like we lost at least 100, maybe even $140 million going to that fund. I'm curious why.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're again on 97A, the bottom of page 7. And yes, there was in the original JAC bill, there was a $190 million transfer from the general fund to the PMTF reserve account. And this action here drops it by $150 million. So there will be a $40 million deposit into the PMTF reserve account. And why did we do that? We have to have a balanced budget, and because of all of the actions in all of the other bills going on within the legislature, we recognize that we had one of two choices. We could spend money out of the LSRA to put money into the reserve account, or we could just reduce the amount that we put into the reserve account. And in the conference committee, we didn't see it as prudent to just move money out of the LSRA into that reserve account. And so that's why we chose to take the reduction versus doing that transfer from the LSRA. And really, it's all the other bills we had this session, friends. You know, we have backfills for tax relief out there. We spent money in quite a few other regards. All of us did, from all of our committees, our individual bills. That's where it came from. And so we had to find a way to balance it, and we felt it was the most prudent way to balance it was to just make a smaller deposit into that PMTF reserve account. So I think it's prudent. It's still very balanced. The LSRA will maintain a nice, strong balance. The reserve account is still growing, which is just what we want. So it's all positive. It's not as though the money is gone. It's just which account it's in currently. And so, again, I think it's a good, strong budget. And that's the answer on 97.
All right. Chairman Nicholas, are you on page 8?
Well, on the same, to the
Okay,
good
go
representative
ahead.
from Laramie County. So this number is directly related to property taxes.
Representative Chairman, you got to face the mic because nobody can hear you.
That's so funny because I can hear myself quite well. So honestly, this number is directly related to our property tax bills, right? So the more we refund ourselves, the more we have to pay ourselves. And it's just basically that simple.
Okay, are we on page 8? Who's page 8? Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Speaker, excuse me. We are now on page 8, the top of it, 97B. Again, we've inserted a few here, and so there's some A's and B's, and we're on 97B, the top of the page we adopted. And this is in regards to the military land exchange that we saw, I believe it was item 41 here earlier. But what we have done here is once that money comes from the state general fund over to the school side, then we chose to deposit that into the reserve account. And so it was a very similar amendment on both the House and the Senate side. The Senate put it all into the corpus. The House put the money into the, I think the words stated, to the appropriate account. And so technically of that roughly 15.1 million, about $1.7 million of it is for land purchase. That probably could be argued that it needs to go to the corpus. And then the remaining 13 million and change is a 40-year land lease, which should go to the income account. Since it's all coming in a lump sum, we thought let's put it in the reserve account. That way it can serve our investment purposes well and treat us well in both sides of the account. So that's what we're doing there. It's just a correction, or I shouldn't even say a correction, it's just a transfer of funds so that we can take that military money coming in and put it into the reserve account. So that's what we're doing in 97B. Moving on to 98, we adopted Senate second reading number 47. And this, what the Senate had done, this is in regards to the large school savings account that the Appropriations Committee had set up. Our friends down the hall, they removed that account, and so we adopted that, meaning the account has been removed. There is no large school savings account on the school side. Moving on to item 98A, we then in the JCC, we added $150 million to the school construction section of section 313, and this is in 313J number 4. Again, that's the school construction section of that. We've added $150 million. And then on that list of 5 projects, we've added a 6th project, and that is a high school in Sweetwater County, and that's for construction and demolition or disposition of the old high school. Moving on to number 99, this is Senate third reading number 30. We deleted that, and so that means we have retained the deposit into the Wyoming's Tomorrow Trust Fund of $20 million. Item number 100, we deleted it. This is Senate third reading number 31, and this is in regards to effective immediate language on a couple different accounts, and so we'll keep the effective immediate language on the transfer to the general fund our general fund to the Water Development One account, as well as the general fund to the Capital Preservation account. Again, so that all we've done there is just keep that effective immediate language in place. Item 101, deleted Senate third reading number 32, and this is in regards to the ability to purchase the Mach-Ettes. So we will be able to purchase the Mach-Ettes should the opportunity present itself. Item number 103, it was a delete and further amend of Senate second reading number 48. And what this will do in the end is this will reduce the deposit to the State Museum Savings Account. The House had a position of or JAC even had a position of a $10 million deposit into a newly created Wyoming State Museum Construction Savings Account. The Senate removed it entirely, and we met them in the middle, and so it will be a $5 million deposit into that State Museum Savings Account. Moving on to item 103, this again is a delete and further amend. This is House second reading number 33, and this is in regards to the 988 Lifeline. The position of the House was a $40 million deposit into that 988 Lifeline Trust, and the position of the JCC is it will be a $10 million deposit into the 988 Lifeline Trust. Moving on to item number 104, deleted House second reading number 34, and this is removing the $25 million for the BEAD program. we were discussing in capital construction on the previous page, the Stoltz Hall. So all of this 25 million was a reversion. And so we took that same 25 million in reversions and are using it to help pay for the construction of Stoltz Hall. So that's how we were able to bring the cost of Stoltz Hall down in terms of new expenditures. Moving on to item 105, we adopted Senate second reading number 49. And this was to remove the average daily membership language. The Senate had removed it. We agreed with them to remove it. And this comes back to the concept that the Joint Conference Committee Chairman discussed earlier when he said the things that should be done through the Green Books will be done through, or need to be done through the Green Books. We took all of those out through the Conference Committee in multiple different locations, and this is another one of those. That's a change that should come through a bill and change the Green Books however we would like, but it shouldn't be just for a 2-year change on that. Moving on to item number 106, adopted House third reading number 36. And this is in regard to the carryover funds. And this really is just an authorization to use these funds. There was a little confusion as we were putting it forward. And this is in regards to the state hospital demolition and abatement over there. And this is just an authorization language. We had it here in the House because there was some confusion if those funds were there, but were they authorized to be expended? And so this was the authorizing language so that they could be expended. Moving on to item 107. Deleted Senate third reading number 35, and this is school CapCon. And so what this did by deleting this Senate amendment is we brought all of the school CapCon back into the bill just as it was presented to all of you during the budget presentation. No changes, no additions, no subtract. Well, the addition we discussed up the page a ways, but this part of it just simply brings it back to its original form for school CapCon. Number 108, deleted Senate third reading number 35. And this was the Senate, or our friends down the hall, had moved and added a component level project for Sweetwater County. And so we removed that component level project. As we discussed, there is a new project for a high school in Sweetwater County, and there wasn't a need to do the component project on the old high school. And so that's why that was removed. And then item 109 at the bottom of page 8, deleted Senate third reading number 36. And this was in regards to the 1% statutory amount of our severance tax. And so it will allow the current flow as it's established in our statute in the Green Books to stay as it is. And the current flow is 50% of that 1% statutory amount of severance tax will go to the PMTF corpus. The other 50% will go to the common school corpus. Again, this is another one of those that we discussed earlier, the chairman discussed earlier, that if we want to make these changes, that we should make them in the Green Books. We shouldn't be doing these things just in the context of the budget bill. So this was another one of those that we just went in and said, we're not going to do that here. And so that's what item 109 does. Happy to take any questions on page 8. Thank you.
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My first question has to do with line 98A. And we see this is in purple, so I assume this is a new ad by the Free Committee. This is for a high school in Sweetwater County. My question has to do with whether or not this particular school has had a Mercer report completed. Would also like to know where this school was on the priority list from the committee who makes that priority list for construction. And I know that the previous joint committee received a briefing on lawsuits and how this was affected by that. So I know that some of that is limited in what we can speak about here, but just would like to know if all that was taken into account before this was added.
Representative Western, could you come take the helm here, and I'll turn that back over to Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're on the question is on item 98A in regards to a high school in Sweetwater County. This was in the original school construction bill as a project on the list to be designed. And so after we had further conversations, it was noted that about 6 years ago, there was a satellite high school built in Sweetwater County. And that satellite high school was built and designed to be added on to, as that was the big dream and big goal of that district, is to have that new location be the location of their permanent high school at some point in the future. And so as the committee discussed this, it was recognized that those designs and plans are already on the shelf and ready, closer to ready to go than any other school on that design list. And so it seemed prudent that if we're going to save the funds for a large high school, from a cost effectiveness standpoint, it makes sense to do design and construction back to back essentially. So we don't design something, put the plans on the shelf for 10 years and then come back and start all over. And so because this was already structured that way, of the 3 schools within the design component, design part of the existing capital or school capital construction section 313, and we thought this would be the most shovel ready of any of the shovel ready projects to move it forward. And then now to the question about a Mercer study, and this is where I think there's some confusion on what is a Mercer versus what is the facility condition index studies. And so the Mercer study will be the next component of this. Once you get to the design, you do the Mercer, and so the Mercer will then establish how to effectively allocate the square footage within the school and things of that nature. And so all of these things are just the next step in the process as we continue to move forward. As to the question about staff briefings on various things, really the bottom line that came out of the staff briefings is we have to spend money on schools. That's what the courts have stated. Capital construction, classroom instruction, all of it has to be, we have to spend money on schools. Doing less was not going to get us anywhere. Doing more is really what the ideal thing is, and so do the best we can is where we landed. And so that was how I would answer that staff briefing. But again, that's how we came to those conclusions. These discussions were very in-depth. We spent many hours working on this, so it certainly was not something that we walked in and just did just a kind of ad hoc. It was certainly discussed and discussed heavily.
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, to 98A, the MRSA study, as I understand it, is basically the first step. We look at the most cost-effective resolution, and it just seems to me that right here, we're really putting the cart before the horse. Could you kind of elaborate on what the MRSA study is supposed to be and where it should go in the process?
Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yes, I think I can address that about the most cost-effective remedy for this particular high school in Sweetwater County. The most cost-effective remedy study was already done in 2016 for this school at the exact same location where it will be built. It was already completed then, and the result of that process was that in 2018, that a satellite high school that is a much smaller version, about 1/8 the size, frankly, of the original design, was actually built and has been built, but it was built to be scalable. So there's not really a question of, oh, do you put the school in this location or do you put it across town? There's really only one obvious place to put it. What's nice about this project is that they can just dust off the design, frankly, from 8 years ago, tweak it, bring it up to date, and it's shovel ready and ready to go, as the previous speaker said. So of our choices, this, I don't think the likelihood of there being some kind of legal attack because you didn't do a most cost-effective remedy study is remote. We're not going to have a problem with that.
Representative Pendergraft, follow up.
Yes, please. My understanding in my research, and maybe I'm wrong, but as of about 2020, all the prior MRSA studies were declared obsolete or invalid, and they wanted to go back and redo that. Could you speak to that?
Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, yes, it is true that you would update the design. You would update the study, but there's a big difference between having to update a study you've already done and having to create one from scratch.
Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question on 105. If you could just go into a little bit more detail on this because it kind of directly relates to, frankly, something this body is being sued over at the moment. So, but just for clarification, you adopt something that deletes something. I don't know where we ended up. I would like to know that. Do we end up at what is currently in the green books, or do we end up at something that is different than what is currently in the green books?
Representative Walters?
Thank you, Mr. Whip. Let me whip to the answer on that one. It is confusing. Adopting a deletion, where do we end up? We end up exactly what is in the green books. There is no change occurring in this budget bill to average daily membership. That is the final point of 105, is there is no change to the green books with that action. So it is just as we have, nothing is changing.
Representative Bear?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going to line 103, we have $10 million going into the trust fund for the 988 hotline. My question is, do we still maintain the funding for the 2 call centers that was part of the biannual budget? Just want to make sure we're still funding, because the trust fund is meant to fund for perpetuity those call centers. So obviously with only about a quarter of the funds in the trust fund, won't be capable of doing that. Just want to know, is that still in the budget, those funds necessary to maintain the 2 call centers?
We'll go with Representative Larson and then Representative Walters.
Thank you for that question, and the answer is yes. That so the intent of building up the trust fund, in, you know, if we could do it all at once, great, but if not, end result of the trust fund is that then we would take revenue that is generated from the trust fund moving forward to supplement the Department of Health's budget specific to the 988 hotline. But until that happens, we fund it in the Department of Health's budget.
Representative Yen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to make sure that I can clarify when I go home. The item number 98A, the additional stuff for the Sweetwater County School District, is that the reason that in the White Rod, on page 4 of the White Rod School Foundation Program, on line 30, the JCC status, I mean, I'm assuming that this is the reason. I just want to confirm that the JCC status is greater than the House status. I just want to make sure that when I go home and people ask me questions, what happened there, that I can explain it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Walters?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm impressed that the folks in County 22 read the goldenrod close enough to notice that difference. So that's, no wonder their home values are so high over there. They are a well-educated group, so I'm impressed. But yes, that would be the answer to the question. The good representative answered his own question, and thank you for bringing that.
Representative Stith?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So folks, turning to page 9 of your 11 by 17, if you like to cut budgets, you're going to like page 9 a lot, because we're cutting $135 million out of the budget just on page 9. So you're going to like this page. So at the very top, item 110, that is a deletion. It's a technical deletion that really doesn't have much consequence. What it would have done is, if federal mineral royalties had come in over the expected amount in fiscal year 25 and 26, if that had happened, it would have had a third of the amount going to the school foundation program instead of having 40%. So it's a 7% difference. As it happens, the amount of money involved here is not much. We deleted that, which keeps it back to the base budget with on the over the cap amount, over the secondary cap, as it's called, for federal mineral royalties. There should be 60% going to essentially to the PRA or general fund, and 40% to the school foundation program. Item 111 is one that you may like. Here's what we're doing. We're cutting by $35 million out of the amounts for this research project at our university. The research, as you may recall, involves flow-through porous media. Well, what's that? It's designed to enhance how much oil you get out of a rock, essentially. The proposal was original proposal was 75 million from the state, 75 million from the private sector. Essentially, we've now cut that by $35 million, so it's $40 million going from the state, and then it's sort of up to our university to make up the difference if they can. Item 112, what's going on here is a big savings. We're cutting $100 million here on the large project energy matching funds. You'll recall original base budget had $200 million going for large energy matching funds. And what is this all about? It's about trying to leverage a really big project. So for example, if you could get a carbon capture and sequestration project where the state would kick in money and then the federal government would kick in 3 times that amount, you could do an expensive project that might save a coal-fired generation plant in the northeast part of the state and help our coal industry and help our mineral severance and ad valorem taxes. So, but what we're doing here, the move is to cut $100 million out of that that project. The next line, 113, it's a small change to, there was a $5.2 million appropriation, $5.2 million appropriation in last year's budget, which was split evenly between a couple different projects. What this does, the effect of this is to keep $2.7 million of it for a specific project in the northeast part of the state. The remaining $2.5 million, again from a prior appropriation from last year, is more up for grabs for any community to apply for a so-called community facility. Item 114 and 115 go together. What's happening here is that for the people who are investment staff in the office that handles our treasury and the investment staff in the office that handles our retirement, part of their compensation is based upon their performance, right? Well, how do you judge their performance? You have a benchmark. And those benchmarks get set right now so for our treasurer side, gets set by the investment funds committee, basically, and on the retirement side by the retirement board. This is a study to make sure that those benchmarks are being set at the appropriate level. That's what those 2 amendments are about, so that stays in. Item 116 is also a technical review. It relates to a review to our the accounting system for the state, which has been in place for, I think, a long time, several decades. I'm not sure exactly how long it's been in place. It needs to be updated. What this item 116 does is that it keeps the governor's office in the loop, so it's not just the office that deals with the budget relating to that. So items 117, 118, and 119, good news here, folks. The House position prevails on the sale of the Kelly parcel. Remember, when we amended it on third reading, we said if the federal government wants us to play nice in the sandbox with them in the northwest part of the state, they need to play nice with us in the southwest part of the state. That amendment remains. That's 118. We are adopting that. From my point of view, I think that's a good news. There's no dollars amount associated with this, of course, but it could have a significant economic impact in a positive way. 119 is for hunting and grazing, again, on the Kelly parcel. So that takes care of page 9. Any questions on page 9? Page 10.
All right, please continue.
Moving on to page 10, if I may. At the very top, again, we start out on item 120. Effectively, you'll recall that to keep our pension system on an even keel, we asked the state employees to kick in a little bit extra money to keep the pension solvent so it would be on a positive trajectory going up. We had in our budget that we would help the employees pay the employees' share, and that came to $3.4 million. We are now taking that out, and so that the state employees will have a little bit of skin in the game. And recall that the state employees essentially pay 20%, 20 cents of each dollar that goes in. So yes, they will actually have to pay the 20 cents out of their own pocket, but they get $1 worth of contribution for it. So it's, in my view, a pretty good deal. On line 121, this is enterprise inflation. You'll see it's a delete, and it's in very light handwriting. The effect of that is the $28 million to handle baked-in inflation amounts such as rent increases for office buildings that the state lease, our department that handles services for families has in Riverton, for example. Their rent goes up. This gives them the money to pay the rent. So that inflation money stays in the budget. Item 122, this $95,000 grant to county clerks, that goes for election education, voter education, that goes away. Item 123, this also relates to employee compensation. You'll recall that big picture, the whole purpose of this so-called Phase 3 was to try to deal with the compression problem, because you have long-term employees who are now getting paid about the same as short-term people who got hired recently. The governor had wanted essentially $72 million. We cut that to 18. We're cutting it again to 9. This $9 million does not go into effect until July 1 of 2025. So it's important to note this will biennialize to 18. It's just that we're not going to pay anything in fiscal year 25 starting on July 1 of 2024. So no pay increase this year, but state employees will get a small increase July 1, 2025. Item 124, this was the amendment that would have given an increase to the Hathaway Scholarship. You may remember the Hathaway Scholarship hasn't really been adjusted for inflation in a very long time, so its buying power is less. The House had wanted to bump that up by 5%, which is about $1 million. That's being deleted. So, and the idea is maybe that should be handled with a bill. Maybe we get to that in the next legislature may deal with that. The item 125 it's an interesting one. It's a compromise between the parties' positions. You'll recall the folks down the hall, what they wanted to do, because we're adding, the budget added 52 full-time equivalent employees, 52 new FTEs. Our folks down the hall wanted to cut that by 42, but not necessarily those positions, but just cut 42 somewhere. The compromise was to direct the governor to cut 24 positions, 24 positions from whatever vacancies the governor should choose. And those are, and of those 24 positions, notably, those are positions that are vacant as of June 30th of 2024. So the positions that will be cut, that we're asking the governor to cut, are not the new 52 positions that were created, that will be created effective July 1, because that would kind of defeat the purpose of creating the new positions. That results in a savings expected of about $2 million. You'll see over there, $2,108,000. Our next item, 126. So you recall that we increased the death benefit to 90% of an officer's salary who is killed in the line of duty. We had that both in the budget and we had that in a bill. The bill passed, and it's better to have it in a bill, so we're deleting it from the budget because we don't need it in the budget. Item 127, this is K through 12 school district mental health service grants. We'd had it originally at 18.5 million. I believe that was a House amendment. Our compromise position is to reduce that quite substantially down to $10 million. And then the last couple on this page, 128, is relates to the Outdoor Recreation Tourism Trust Fund account earnings. And essentially, this would have done something with the income. We're deleting it, so I apologize for my vagueness of what life would have been like had we adopted it. So no change there. 129, This one's actually quite significant. We're deleting it. It's an interesting debate. There's a lot going on in item 129. It's an interesting debate. This may come back in a future legislature to talk about what our spending policy amount would be. Right now, it's at 5% of the 5-year rolling average of the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund, which throws off 5% of our $10 billion basically each year. It's an interesting debate whether that should come down from 5 to 4.5 or to some other number. That's an interesting debate to have, but not appropriate, we thought, to have in the budget itself. It's kind of a bigger discussion. Same with the 1 cent, same with the earnings from the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund reserve account. This really would have amended our statutes, our so-called green books. Thought that was not appropriate, so that is being deleted in this conference report. Any questions on page 10? Seeing none.
Chairman Nicholas on page 11.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So it's 10:30. We're still alive. We're still moving. So every page we've gone through, I mean, I see blood on the ground and I see the sunshine. That's this process, ladies and gentlemen. And it's not easy for us being on this committee, but I know that it's a struggle for you to understand everything that we've done and how we get there. This is part of the spaghetti making or sausage making of the legislature. So with your indulgence, I'm going to bring you the last page. And it's actually going to happen pretty quick. Well, second to the last page. So at 1:30, right? All this is a returning to the House position on whether or not we get rid of SIPA. And it's our position that we should not, and we won on that position. So it was a compromise on their side, and it was one of the stronger positions that we advocated in the conference committee. So then you go down to 131, once again, it was a Senate position that we said, no, we're not going to screw with the LSRA the way they want to. It's about that simple. And then let's go to 132. You'll recognize this. This has to do with the ARPA dollars, and we added in a little bit of money for our good water tower in Wheatland. So we did it both in the bill and in the budget to make sure that we got that project done because it's an emergency and we just thought it was the right thing to do. And then if you go down to the bottom, 134, we added a new charter school in the southwestern part of the state. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Chairman, is that it? Chairman Larson.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I move the adoption of the Joint Conference Committee Report Number 1 to House Bill 1 and ask for concurrent, or the adoption of the report.
So I guess, is that the right motion? Do I have to have the, yeah, I think that's probably good.
Did I do good?
You did good. All right. We are voting on, we can discuss if we want. Anybody go to the mic that wants to discuss? This is second reading rules. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was hoping to ask a question, but given we're in second reading, I'll be brief, I guess. In the item 134, and I believe we saw it in another section of the budget bill, is the addition of charter school. I'm wondering if there was discussion about how much that's going to end up costing in the long run. I believe we have an additional $14 million that we've spent on the charter schools that we have now of increased funding. And so I would like to hear potentially from our appropriators on that, on those items and what maybe we can anticipate as increased costs because we're adding charter schools in our budget.
So this is second reading rules, and you made the motion, so you would be using up all of the shells in your clip. So if some other appropriator wants to go up to the mic and answer that question, they can, or he can do it at the end. Or the good chairman can do that later. But just remember, this is second reading of debate rules. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Also, one question in regards to 134. The language in this says that this charter school is in the western half of Wyoming. That's pretty specific. Why would we not allow a charter school to be, if that was the case, created all over the state? Because right there, you've just exempted my constituents in my half of the state. So just wondering what's the specifics on that.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just at a 30,000-foot level, we've gone through this, all of this for the past few hours. What is the bottom line number? I think the chief executive's recommended budget was 10.8 billion. I'd like to know what this bottom line number is and how many FTEs will be added. I think I heard 52. I just want to verify those numbers before I go home. Thank you.
Sorry, I got to do this real quick so I get caught up on who was at the mic. Representative Yin, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm really appreciative of all the work that the JCC did, but I'm also very, very disappointed with the positions that we kind of compromised on. I think that there was a lot of good work that we really did here in the House that is essentially going to end up on the cutting room floor. Of course, there are things that we can bring back in the next session, but I think there are things that would have definitely helped people right now, as well as helped each of our communities, right? Especially a lot of those tourism objectives, the energy matching funds. There are lots and lots of things that I really wish we could have had a better position on, and I'm disappointed that our colleagues across the hall couldn't help us out on those positions. I will say that I think as a whole, I'm still very fond of the budget and the work that the JAC did over the interim and presented it to us, but I just wanted to express my disappointment on all the things that were left on the cutting room floor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Ward, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a similar question to the good representative from District 18, and that is, where can I find the total budget listed somewhere in the summary documents we have? I think it's 11.5 billion, but I don't see that number anywhere. Also, I believe our people who help us advised us that the number to run the budget was 8.78 billion, and then what we spent in 23-24 was 10.3. So where are those numbers? Because I don't see them anywhere. Thank you.
Anybody else for their first time? Representative Burkhart, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First for a second.
All right. Chairman Eklund, for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, I've appreciated the work of the Joint Appropriations and the committee for what they've got here. As you've heard me at the mic, I'm a little disappointed with one of the things that we lost on. It looks like we gave quite a bit to the Senate, but it's just kind of how things go when you make sausage. And I appreciate the work that was done, and I may be speaking more over things as we progress with this conversation, but all in all, I think it's good for the people of Wyoming to get this settled and not leave this place without doing what we needed to get done. And I think, thanks committees for what you've done. It's good work.
Representative Stith, for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I wanted to address the question from the member from District 18 because it's a really good question of how much money are we spending? And so I checked briefly with our fiscal administrator. So these numbers are not from me making them up, but from our fiscal administrator, as I understand it. So the Joint Appropriations Committee recommendation that came out your base budget that came out on February 6th that you saw on your desk when session started, all in was at $11.1 billion. However, there's inside that $11.1 billion was $1.3 billion of essentially a kind of double counting because it's paying money from one account to the other account. So in terms of spending, it's actually closer to 10. And in that original JEC budget, that actually had reduced, that was lower than what our chief executive had recommended in November by $55 million of general fund. So what we started with in JAC, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, is $55 million less than what our chief executive had recommended. And now what you have today in this final Joint Conference Committee 2 report is $38 million of general fund less than that. So it's on a downward trajectory. And then the all-in, if you count all funds, not just general funds, but all the other funds, special revenue, federal funds, school foundation program, all of these funds, what you have in front of you right now is $276 million less, $276 million less than what the JAC recommendation was 3 weeks ago that you had on your desk on February the 12th. So significant trimming of the budget. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a first for a second.
Representative Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you. And just to follow up on the good representative from Sweetwater County, think about what this body has done for state employees in the last 2 years. The first pay raises they've seen in 8 years. And think about what we did for inflationary values for just the cost of doing business. If you add those two together, that's over $120 million. And yet, our total general fund dollars is is roughly $100 million difference from 2 years ago. So what we did is we cut and we cut and we cut from what this body originally wanted. And it wasn't easy. I mean, I hear arguments today on both sides of did we do enough or did we do too much? And I mean, every page turn is difficult for me when we just went through that. But I think that we have been fiscally conservative, and we're trying to do the best for the state of Wyoming. Thank you.
Representative Bear.
First for a second, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to talk about the savings part of this for just a moment on page 2, line 27. You will see transfer to savings, and part of that savings is immediately enacted. So there's $40 million that you don't see over in the right-hand column, but it actually is going into savings. And then you have $130 million in the column for the JCC. But what I want to also point out is when you look at this profile, it picks up the accounting of our money at a point after money has already gone into these savings accounts. So if you're familiar with these green sheets, the Craig report that you got that was updated in January, if you look at table 5 and look at the projected savings, there's a constitutional piece that goes into permanent savings, and so you can see that there, the constitutional amount is $431,800,000. And then we also have a 1% severance tax, which is statutory, and there's another $108 million that goes into the Common School Permanent Land Fund. So you see that this is just, what shows up on the white rod is just a fraction of the total amount of dollars that we're actually saving. Thank you.
Representative Knapp for your first time.
First for a second, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Hornock for your first time.
First for a second, thank you.
Representative Crago.
Can I say first for a third, since I'm third
No, we
row?
can do first for a second.
First for a second, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, just real quick, I just wanted my appreciation for the members of the JCC, and I was particularly irritated when I saw, I had like 6 items I thought were, gosh, these are, and I think 2, and they were all kind of, one of them had legs pretty well, one leg chopped off. And, but in the end, I think that's part of that process. So I slept on it, got over it. And, but I think the question, in my mind, Mr. Speaker, is, first of all, I think this dollar amount, this $10 billion amount, what is that? Because we never really talked like that before in the legislature. And so that's something kind of new. And so I think most of that probably comes from the chief executives. There's a B1 report he talks about, and those dollar amounts in the governor's recommendation, I can just give them to you right here. It was about 2.9 in general fund, 2 billion in federal funds, and then about 5 billion in other funds. And so what are other funds? I mean, so many of them are federal funds, many of them are gaming funds, game and fish funds, YDOT funds, Department of Health funds. So there's all these things out there that a lot of those we don't even appropriate so much. I mean, that we don't really dig into at that with our boards and agency, all those things. So I think when you look at the general fund, I think that's the key thing that we really work on. That's been most of our work. And you can see that this budget kind of brings us, it's kind of this first transition budget post-COVID and post-2016 economic crash, where I guess I can't say the countries combined on a price war to drive oil down, and we were under $20 a barrel, and then COVID hit and we went negative, and then all this, then the special session. Most of you weren't serving then, where we were sending elderly to nursing homes out of state. I mean, it was the worst of the worst. And so then when we got these federal funds, I know I worked with the good co-chair. I said, let's identify the worst of the worst cuts we made and try to work on those a couple of years ago. And then here we are. So so even though I certainly didn't get all I wanted, and none of us did, I'm just really appreciative. I think this budget sends the state forward. Sun came up on the House chamber again. It's a beautiful thing, and I think all these things spread across our state is so important. So none of us got all we wanted. It'd actually be kind of scary if we all did get all we wanted. And so in support of the Joint Conference Committee, and I probably will speak a second time, Mr. Speaker, but thank you.
Anybody else for their first time? Representative Clouston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the great things by sitting by the accountants from the center of our state is I get to ask him accounting questions this whole time. So, last year we saved 1.4 billion. The 4 numbers that our good accountant just gave us add up to another $709 million of savings. So if this budget goes through, I just want to congratulate everybody. It's over $2 billion in savings in 2 years. So proud of that number and proud of all of us. Thank you.
Representative Berger for your first time.
Good. I would just want to reach out, Mr. Speaker, thank you, and reach out to the Appropriations Committee for the work they do. It's a lot. I've been watching the videos and trying to understand all this. And the people who have helped me understand and asking the questions that I needed to, but really what I'm most proud of is this body and the group of people here that are working, everyone's opinions, everybody that works for this. And you've done a wonderful job. I am impressed. I'm most impressed by how much you care about your communities and the state of Wyoming. And I appreciate that. I love hearing all your stories. So thank you.
Representative Ward, did I see you hanging around the mic? No, are you, you were a first, sorry. Representative Pendergraft for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A question was asked earlier about how many FTEs this budget adds, and I haven't heard an answer yet, so I would just second that. And
All right, Chairman Zwanitzer, Dan.
Thank you. First for a second.
Anybody else? Representative Jennings first for a second. All right. Now, anybody for their second time? Representative Stith, were you a first time somewhere?
Mr. Speaker, I was.
Okay, there you are. All right. Representative Stith.
Mr. Speaker, just two small things. One is a slight correction. When I said 11.1 billion with 1.3 billion in double entries and enterprise funds, that is the budget you have in front of you right now. So if you take the 11.1 billion, you subtract out the 1.3 billion, so all in, all funds, we're at 9.8 billion on what we'll be voting on in a few minutes. So I want to make that, because I may have said it differently before. So what is that in terms of our general fund right now? If you look on page 2 of our white rod, we're at 3.8 billion, and the current biennium you'll see is 3.7 billion. So we're right, very close in to our current biennium. Thank you.
Anybody else for their second time? Representative Berger?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think I'm right by saying this, I hope I am, but in the last few years, over the COVID years, when we were having to cut FTEs, it was about 400 jobs in this state that were cut, which we had to be a few people. And congratulations to those people who were staying on, because that's a lot of work piled on them. And I believe in this budget, the way I see it, we're adding around at 50 new employees. And we're doing better. But those employees that have stayed through this whole thick and thin and getting us through where we need to be today and keep running our state, from transportation to teachers to everyone, judicial branch, thank you. It has been hard. And thank you for being fiscally conservative. Thank you.
Okay, who's next on the second time? Representative Bear for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Several comments I'd like to address, but one of the most important is this discussion started with the chairman of the JCC telling us that we were looking at 11.5 billion in this budget. We've just had a member of the Appropriations Committee tell us that we're 11.1, and that 1.3 billion of that is a double entry that we shouldn't pay attention to. And that when we do all the hocus pocus, we're somewhere around 10. I have to say that, you know, it was in the media that this budget that we received from the executive was at 10.8 going into this session. And I believe the appropriators, when they say that they removed somewhere around $40 million from that budget. So what we started out with was somewhere around 10.75. I brought a rule, if you recall, that failed in this body, but would have kept us at that 10.75. But again, today we were told we're at 11.5. And there's a lot of numbers getting thrown around. It's very difficult to pay attention. So, not to pay attention, but to understand. So I would remind the body that there's been several efforts over the last few years to simplify our budget process. Certainly am in favor of that. One of the things that was brought up by the chairman of revenue is that not too long ago, we were dealing with COVID and we were having to send elderly out of the state. But I'll remind the body that the department that is in charge of those funds made a decision that year to cut programs rather than employees. And ever since, this body has been adding more employees. So it was a good decision when money became available for us to bring those elderly back in and try to get the programs going again, allow them to stay in their homes. But remember that people are making decisions that affect this budget every day. Usually those decisions are bureaucrats that are here after we've gone home. There was one overarching thing that we really needed to take care of when we came into this session. I think every one of your constituents made it really clear to you, and that was that their property taxes on their real estate that they own were getting out of control. And we've done some good work in this body, especially in the Revenue Committee, where we went through almost 20 bills we worked on. We came out with 4. And the way I see it, you know, a good representative from my area just mentioned how good we've been putting away $2 billion over the last couple of years. But I'll remind this body, there was a lot of discussion about how we can't afford to give too much back to the people. We put $2 billion in savings, and we struggled to give $150 million back to the people who contributed to that $2 billion. I believe that the budget is the largest in the history of the state, and yet we have failed to significantly reduce the burden on the taxpayers. Thank you.
Okay, who's next on their second time? Chairman Harshman.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. To kind of just talking about FTEs, I think that was brought up a couple speakers ago. So just to kind of remind the body, give a little historic perspective, we are 400 FTEs lower than we were at our all-time high, I think it was 2010. Most FTEs in the last several decades that have ever been hired when we opened a new prison in southeast Wyoming and 220 some employees. So I mean, so our FTE count historically is way down. And I think that's been a lot of conservative budgets over the last couple decades. I think the other part, I just want to, the good representative from Campbell County, I think, and boy, I do appreciate all the work on property tax, and it's not over yet. You know, we're going to keep working, and particularly some big changes on personal property, I think, and we all know about what 2 pennies, the power of 2 pennies can do. But I want to talk about this savings thing real quick. There's kind of some information going out that we're kind of like saving all this money, and we're not. We got 28 billion in all these funds. And I think, first of all, I think it's important for us to really speak to our constituents. What is that? What is that 28 billion? You know, 6 billion is state agency pool. That's just an accounting to run government. 2.6 is workers' comp, all those things. But really, how much are we saving? And we're talking about when we give these refunds back to the people, which I've supported, and I've worked hard, put a lot of hours in over the last couple of years, last 4 years really, but we're really transferring mineral money back to the people. And that's fine, I mean, I get that. But how much are we actually saving? And so if you look at all the mineral taxes that pay, you know, over 50% of our taxes, we're spending 85+% of it on today's people. Every year, we're saving about 15% for the future. And then I would say that future is now, you know, because it kicks off about 30% of our revenue. I mean, our permanent guarantee of never having an income tax in this state. So, you know, I think we're spending 85%, and that's always this tension for today's people or tomorrow's future. And I think we struck a pretty good balance in this state. And I think this budget also reflects that. And so I appreciate the work. It's not perfect, but only God's perfect. And so when you walk up those stairs every morning. So again, I think everybody we've done a lot of work on this, and we can go home and spread good information to our people. And that we've done the best we can, and we'll keep working. That's what we do. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, on and for this Joint Conference Committee report.
Representative Yin for your second time.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'm also on and for the conference committee report, but I do want to continue to highlight the things that ended up on the floor. A lot of things were basically the top priorities. I think we did tackle the top priority, I think, of my opinion of the session, which is property tax relief. However, the other priorities that we all know that are a priority are our energy industry, mental health needs, the suicide hotline, and helping senior citizens. All of those things are programs that got cut in the budget. So we had 8.5 million drop on mental health needs for our students, 100 million drop for the energy matching funds, and those energy matching funds are ones to keep Wyoming adaptable and responsive while still being matching funds, right? So we're not losing $100 million. We're losing $100 million plus all of those matching funds that we would have been able to match with those $100 million. Matching funds to feed hungry kids in schools. We even heard from our chief executive that there was going to be flexibility if we still had those funds in the budget, where we wouldn't be double spending on school districts that already had programs. It would be an opt-in for all those districts that didn't have any programs to feed during the summer. So that's really disappointing. The suicide hotline, without those 40 million, we're going to have to keep funding it in a different way. So it's either going to be finding a different revenue stream or funding it every year out of the general fund. That's disappointing. We could have just saved the taxpayers' money and ensured that we just had it funded in perpetuity. And then we had money, we had a couple of different programs for seniors. We cut about $1.3 million from each of those. So again, I do want to highlight, I think overall we've done really, really, really good work on the budget bill. But I'm disappointed that our colleagues down the hall couldn't agree that there are so many things that we could have pushed forward with the state on to invest in our communities, to invest in our people, to make sure that that next generation is going to be able to find housing, to make sure that next generation gets their mental health needs resolved, and to make sure that we help those that are already in need, our senior citizens, as well as be adaptable in a lot of those industries. So I'm disappointed, but I still believe in the budget. And so I do urge you to adopt the Joint Conference Committee report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Knapp for your second time.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. And thank you to JCC. You know, when budgets come out, typically none of us are happy, right? But we do the best both on the savings end and on the spending end. I always say Wyoming's blessed and cursed because we're able to put away and save, but we're also able to sometimes overspend. One thing I wanted to point out was the dangers of budgeting by footnote. And I failed to point this out before, but on page 4, item 55, in-home services for seniors. So this was typically funded by all our communities through a footnote previously. And this footnote this year was cut. So these programs that have been stood up already that are servicing hundreds of our seniors, in some instances will actually have to shut down. So I think as we go back to our communities, one of the things we should point out to our local governments is that money that we did give back over the $105 million this year can go to some of these programs and can be included in regular budgets. And so I just wanted to point that out to the body. Thank you.
Representative Pendergraft for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Had two items, and the first one has to do with the FTEs that we keep throwing up here. And I'm quite aware that we've reduced substantially in recent years the number there. What I'm trying to do is monitor how we're creeping back up. We cut 400 jobs, and somehow we're still here. I admit that that puts a workload on those that remain. I'm just trying to maintain where we're at and keep a good, accurate view of that. And the second thing has to do with the school Capcom. Well, that's one of the things that I focused on in being here and trying to learn and to understand. And what I see is, frankly, a bit chaotic with the shuffling of priorities and some schools getting taken care of while other schools are neglected. And anytime you have inefficiency, I've said it before, anytime you have any inefficiency, it adds to the cost. I would love to help try to sort that out, try to be a part of the solution instead of just standing around and whining about it. So I extend my assistance in that case, however that may be done. Thank you.
Representative Crago for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just hoping to provide a little bit of information. We've talked to staff a little bit and to the good former speakers' concerns and questions. There are 26 new FTEs in this budget as presented to us, and that creates a total statewide of 7,125. So hopefully that helps.
Anybody else for their second time? Representative Locke for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the things I'd like to say about the budget, and it's no surprise to this body that I felt like we didn't put enough back in the people's pockets from the property tax perspective. I know it didn't surprise anybody in this room. That being said, one of the things that I just wanted to throw out here, and this is, there's this mentality, or there appears to be this mentality to some degree that says, hey, you know, we take in this revenue and then we've got to put it into our, you know, fund all these programs and do all these things. And it's absolutely true. The government has to run. But I guess the piece of this that I would ask this body to think about is just a couple perspectives. And I'm not going to argue we are blessed beyond belief by the revenue streams that we have from our minerals and our coal, or I mean our oil and gas and all of those amazing, wonderful things that have blessed this state. There's no doubt about it. That being said, I would also like us to keep in mind that leaving money in people's pockets, how important that is, okay? I know when we put money into savings, our permanent savings, and we're doing good things for the state, keep in mind that some of that money, when we miss opportunities to put some of that money back into the people's pockets, that's us taking money from sources I understand are mineral related, but that's taking money out of people's savings accounts and putting it in ours, okay? So I'm just asking everybody to keep in mind, we might be surprised how well this state would do if we worked really hard to put a little bit of that money, let me state that differently, leave a little bit more of that money in the people's pockets, okay? I'm not looking for the give back. What I think we should be thinking about is how we leave a little bit more money in their pockets, let them spend it. And I know I said this on this floor before. When we spend money, this body, when the government spends money, they don't spend it with heart. When people have money left in their bank account and they spend money, they spend that money with heart. You'd be surprised. I'm always amazed at the benevolence of our people. So I ask this body to think about that as we move forward and look for opportunities where we can do that, where we can leave more money in their pockets, leave it there, not give it back, feel like we're the benevolent one. No, let the people have more of that control and be the benevolent people that they are and spend it on the things they believe are right, okay? Because we're trying to make the best guess for them. And I'm not saying the body does a terrible job of that. They try their hardest. But at the end of the day, I'm going to continue to argue that point. money left in their pockets is spent better than us taking it into our savings accounts and trying to figure out how to spend it for them. Thank you, buddy.
Representative Hornock for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A couple of comments about some things that have been discussed over the last 2 hours. First of all, thank you for the debate over the last couple of weeks. It's been interesting. It does take hours to get into the budget. It takes hours and hours, and everybody that does that in this body is better for it, because we debate bills on this floor, but when it really comes to policy, it's this right here. It's the budget. Where you spend your money equals policy for our state. That really is true. So thank you to everyone who puts in that time, regardless of where we all fall on different issues. But just thank you. Keep it up. We heard a number about vacant positions, or we heard a number, 400 positions were cut over the last couple of years. And let me just be clear, those positions weren't warm bodies. Those positions were vacant, ghost, unfilled positions, and we just eliminated the possibility of hiring those positions. So please understand that when we cut FTEs over the last couple of years, it wasn't that anybody lost their job. Nobody has lost their job. So we just have to be careful when we talk about our numbers on FTEs. And then just think about the years ahead. Maybe not next year, maybe not the year after, but what about 5 years from now? What about 10 years from now? I think this body needs to take a serious look, and it was discussed on this floor a little bit. There was a Senate amendment that was deleted, but this body needs to take a serious look at our spending policy. How much money we are going to take and use and spend. That's going to be a difficult discussion, I think, if our mineral revenue drops. Right now, it's good. We produce less, but the price is high. What happens when we continue that downward trend of producing less and less and less, and the price goes down and down and down? We're going to have some serious conversations about our spending policy within this body. So just want to note that we are in a very volatile economy in Wyoming. I think we do a good job with what we've been given, but I also think that we're tapping ourselves out. We may have saved a lot of money, but those savings are constitutionally required also. Constitutionally required. It's not something that we automatically, or it is something that we automatically have to save. And the revenue streams that come into this state, it seems like we are getting closer and closer and closer to the top of what comes in to this state, and we're spending more and more and more of what comes in. We're going to have to take a very serious look at what we're doing there. And so I think that the trajectory of our spending, maybe it's going to be okay next year. It seemed to be okay this year. We managed to fit it in our revenue, but it might not be okay our next biennium budget. It might not be okay the next one. So just something to keep in mind, just something to think about. We might have to, in the future, have some very, very serious conversations about what we do with a decreasing revenue stream coming into our state. Thank you.
Chairman Eklund, for your second time.
Mr. Speaker, I'm standing here and almost forgot what I was going to say, but I'm not quite. So, you know, I've sat back for the last couple of years and watched some of the discontent and the anger over the fiscal policies of Wyoming, and I really believe that it's anger that probably should be directed elsewhere. The federal government, the way they spend, they bring in $5 trillion and spend 7, 8, 9 trillion, whatever they feel like spending, and I'm mad about that too. Can't do much about it. I've put money into Social Security my whole life, and you just get sick once and you blow that whole, what should have been an investment account that the federal government didn't invest. Now, I'll start right there. This huge savings account we have is like an investment account to every person in the state of Wyoming. So it's giving back to them, and it's doing it. We've done it every year. I've been here 14 years, and I don't think there's a time when we haven't put money into savings. And I don't think it's constitutional we have to every year, but we have because we've seen the importance of it. The anger towards the state doesn't make sense because we pay cash for everything and we save like no other state. We're like nothing any other state in the country's ever seen. And I guess I appreciate what our appropriators have done and the people that have worked on this budget. It wasn't easy. I didn't get a few things I wanted. I think we gave the Senate an awful lot to make sure we got this done. Didn't have to go home and tell the people we didn't finish our big job here. Anyway, thanks for the people who negotiated that. I really appreciate it. And I probably got a few more things to say, but I don't usually talk this long. And I believe what's going on in the state of Wyoming is probably as good as it can be. A few years ago, I do have a few more things to say. A few years ago in the Jonas Center, the mics were blocked up and I couldn't hardly get to talk kind of in the same state. It was later in the evening and we had a set of people really upset that we didn't spend more of our savings. The fiscal restraint we had during that period of time resulted in being able to balance a budget on reserve accounts for a couple more years, and boy, did we ever need them. And now we've got reserve accounts that are full. And it's great. A couple speakers ago, the bounty that we have in Wyoming, I believe it's being invested well. It isn't perfect, but it's not bad. I just so appreciate that we will have an investment account for my kids and their kids and other people in the state. And that savings account is not a one-time deal. It's there and it'll be something we draw on and builds wealth for the state of Wyoming for generations to come. Aye, and for the joint conference report.
Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On in favor of adoption of the Joint Conference Committee 2 report on the budget. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been on appropriations. Most of you know I spent a number of years on appropriations. I know what goes into making these decisions on the budget. What has to be done that you may not want to do, what compromises you have to get to. And sure, on this budget, I looked at it and looked through the report and thought, dang, I didn't want that, but I do want this, and I didn't get that either. That happens. It's a negotiations. It's worse than trying to buy a used truck. And it is, as the good chairman of Revenue used to say, it is a contact sport. You better be ready for a long, hard grind to do it. And I know the hard work that went into it. I applaud the work of the Appropriations Committee and both conference committees and that. And we do have money in savings and we want to keep it there for future generations because frankly, every mineral that comes out of the ground is gone forever. And unless we keep it somehow as cash, we'll never see it again. When it's gone, it's gone. And that was a brilliant idea to put that money away and keep it for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. And some of the older members in here remember when I was on appropriations, I had a plastic sword I kept on my desk called Budget Adjuster. And those were the days when we did not have money. And we had to make some really tough decisions, really tough ones. You know, we've talked about FTEs and all of that. I think I may be the only person in this room who has ever cut FTEs that had people in them. Now, the body put them back in. They felt that was a little extreme at the time. But those were the decisions that we had to make at the time. We have a little extra money, and we've split it up in what I feel is a very equitable manner. And it's easy to budget when you don't have money. You just say no to everything. A lot harder when you do have a little extra. And we've tried to allocate it here and there. We've cut some things, we've added some things. And yes, there are things in that budget I don't like, but I'll vote for it because that's our job. And that's the job we have to do and have to get done, is to get a budget out of here for this state, the people in it, and everything we need to do to plan for the future. And that's what we're here for. We can argue all these little things, but we have to have a budget that works. This budget does. Would I have come up with a different budget? Probably so, and each one of you would have come up with a different budget, I think. But this is the best process we have right now, and I think we need to continue with it. So, Mr. Speaker, again, on and for adoption of the Joint Conference Committee report from Conference Committee 2.
Representative Provenza for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's been said that we haven't been giving enough relief to the people of Wyoming through property tax. And I take some issue with that. Coming into this session, Wyoming taxpayers, for a family of 4, for every dollar that they paid in tax, they got $14 back in services. They received $56,834 in local government services that they do not have to pay for, because that funding comes from money from minerals and investments. For single folks, they're getting more than $30,000 in government services. So I have a hard time understanding how we do not provide relief when our Department of Health saves lives, helps keep our rural hospitals open. I have a hard time believing that we don't provide relief when that funding for those hardworking Wyoming families of 4 receive $56,000 in government funds and services. They're getting their tax dollars back. When we provide a budget, we are giving people their money back through the services that they receive. Public education saves us by setting us up for a successful future. Budget provides our hardworking families the freedom to raise their families, the freedom to take care of their health care, and the freedom to maintain good paying jobs. So to say we're not providing relief when this budget is quite literally providing services in your districts, I take offense to that. I hope you will join me in voting for this conference committee and for the budget. Thank you.
Representative Jennings for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was almost not going to get up again. So we may go through this whole process, and 62 of us represent, and I can't speak for the other 61 districts, but I can speak for one district. And there's a difference in philosophy that you're seeing unwind in this culture. You can say, well, okay, we need to spend this and government needs to do this part or that part. That's one philosophy. And there's another philosophy that says government has reached into too much stuff in our lives. Whether you subscribe, I respect the other opinion with that. I don't subscribe to it, and apparently in my district so far, they have agreed with that. So I would say to the body, go home, own your votes, tell them. The speaker that just spoke, I think in her district, I think that's perhaps a very good position to take. In my district, I think there's a place where we absolutely agree that there ought to be government spending, and there are things that we ought to be doing. But the basket of goods, that's what we're here to decide on. What is the basket of goods? Do we have too many things in the basket of goods? And when we're talking about money back into people's pockets, the minerals, there's a common belief here that minerals is a somehow separate. Well, that's the people of Wyoming. And so I think it's good that we come down here and we debate this and we make votes to spend way more or way less. I don't think it's to be offensive to anyone that one group of people believes the basket of goods is too good or too big, or that the government has grown too fast or has reached into our lives. You're welcome to that opinion. Your constituents put you here. You can express that. It's not meant to be offensive to anyone that there is another train of thought that says less government equals more freedom, people's lives. And I think that's a very important thing that we think about. And we think about money and the savings, and I actually struggle with that one because I think it's very good that we have it. On the other hand, we're only always one generation away from losing our freedoms. And cash does not always translate to security. When I came into this body, I was told a story about a few years before me where the state was losing $100 million a month. Bad times. Money evaporates. It could happen again. Most people think that it will happen again. I'm glad we have money in there and that we have some security, but don't go too far down that road. It can evaporate pretty quick. We've seen it in 29, we've seen it in 08. Our confidence and our real investment is in our people. And so when we have ideologies that think that it's better to not expand government, and it's better to leave more money in the pockets of the people who earned it, it's not meant to be offensive. It's a difference in ideology. For House District 30, I'm going to hold to those values that say it's more important for individual freedoms and less government and a smaller basket of goods perhaps. At least it deserves to be looked at. I don't believe that this budget reflects that, and therefore I'll be a no on this. Don't want to be offensive to anyone about it. I understand that the votes are there on the other side. We'll have a budget. But I'll go home and I will tell the people that we spent more than we've ever spent before. We've saved more. And we did not allow more people to keep the money that they worked for. On and against.
Representative Nyman for your second time.
I'm going to be very brief. We all represent our own districts. We have responsibilities to the people that elected us to these positions. We are the ones that know the best about what the people that put us here feel and believe and want us to do. The struggle that we have in my district is that they can't guarantee themselves an increase in their budget. I mean, I'm an ag, I'm completely subject to whatever all of you are willing to pay for my products. I can't make you pay more than you want to give for them. That's just the reality of it. And I work within those parameters all the time. Whenever the market falls out of bed, I have to just pull in my horns and do what I need to do to try to stay in business. So I'm here for next year when hopefully it'll go up. And that's the message that's been relayed to me from my constituents in House District 1. Now, all of you on the other 61 districts, listen closely to the people you represent. Do exactly, I would hope, the majority of them want you to do. But I have to, and I appreciate several speakers saying that. I mean, we could bludgeon each other with this vote and things like that, but ultimately, I've got to go home because those are the folks that elect me. It's not this body. I have to be accountable to them. And their question to me was, if I have to not know what my budget's going to be and I really have nothing or very little to say about how much you take from me, he said, I wish you could do the same. So just please keep it in reason. Don't grow it. He says, because mine's not growing. He said, we're all in this boat together. So like it or not, I'm going to have to be against this because my people at home are like, how can you grow? We can't. How can you expand when we're not able to? I understand inflation, and I get that. We're going to have to deal with the cost of doing business. And I do that every day. But I have to make allowances, and I have to do away with some things in order to be able to continue to operate. That's what the people at home are telling me. Again, I mean, nobody wants to hear this, but this is the largest budget that will ever been passed in our state's history. It's pretty impressive. Now, I'm going to go home to folks who are saying my income is dropping because I'm having to pay a lot more for things I didn't expect to have to pay for those costs even 2 or 3 years ago. I looked at some figures, folks, and since 2019, we have increased the amount of money that we've taken from only residential property owners by 62.5%. We're taking an additional almost $250 million a year from residential people right now, over and above what we were taking from them in 2019. No severance, no nothing else. We're not talking about mixing and matching numbers and making it sound good. We're pulling over a quarter of $1 billion more from people that weren't paying that level just 4 years ago. They have to come up with that from somewhere. We need to keep that in mind. They don't get to choose whether or not they pay their taxes. They don't get to choose whether or not they have to buy gas. You can. If you want to get to work, you better. So those are the things we need to be mindful as well. We're watching a major increase in what these folks have had to really support. And granted, I mean, the good representative from across the hill, yes. If I have 2 children and what I'm getting, the equivalent value out of in our current system, what we spend on children compared to what I pay in taxes is unbelievable. And our mineral extractive industry pays for that predominantly. We do benefit greatly. But it still doesn't change the fact that the folks that are in those homes and are paying those bills and watching their taxes increase, and I hope that these bills go through, that we can help give them some relief. But we can't be stingy with these folks. They're the folks that are helping to keep this thing running, and they're under a lot of pressure, and there's no end in sight. So vote what you got to do, represent your districts. That's awesome. Good for you. All of us have to. But I would encourage everybody, let's not bludgeon people with what the decisions you've got to make. We're not here to do that. Do what you got to do to represent your districts.
Representative Obermueller for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So on page 2 of your white rod, I just want to point out where one of these numbers are because it kind of disappears on you a little bit if you're just looking at the Joint Conference Committee and on the far right column. You might miss in the first column on line 55 is where Senate File 54 homeowners tax exemption appears of $125 million. And it's important to add that into your calculation of what these, the value of these property tax exemptions. The So when you look at column, or on line 67, there's the totals of the expenses, and compare the joint conference committee with the prior one, it goes up $97 million. Growth of government, highest, highest expenses in history. What has contributed to that, though, is the $216 million of money in people's pockets when you add up all of the exemptions that we have passed for homeowners. So if those weren't in there, our budget this year would actually drop by $118 million. And then in terms of the savings that we just save too much and don't give back, the discretionary part of the savings here is $278 million. So yeah, these are policy choices, but these numbers are relatively close with the money that was put back into people's pockets. And one word about that, as you lament about the growth of government and the future of the growth of government, I don't see that 216 million going away. Well, when we get 2 years downstream and some of this is supposed to go away, do you think that people will be wanting to give the money back out of their pockets? So we're adding a piece of government when we're doing these exemptions, so keep that in mind also. And so the constitutional piece of this is important to remember that in the last biennium and this one, $1 billion has gone into savings, yes, but it is a constitutional piece. That was, the Constitution was amended in 1974 to accommodate this, and generates the $1 billion worth of interest income that we currently enjoy. So thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and for.
All right. Anybody else for their second time before the bringer? And you know what, just, we've had a great discussion. I think and it's been very civil on the floor. I really appreciate all of the positions that were out there. So Chairman Larson, it seems for your second time. And Chairman Larson, just to be sure that I heard correctly, would you ensure that you move Joint Conference Committee Report number 2?
Mr. Speaker, I would, and I think I was in error. I would like to move your Joint Conference Committee number 2, report number 2, to House Bill 1 and ask for the adoption of the report. Did I do good?
Yep, thank you.
So, folks, thank you. Great conversation. I recall, Mr. Speaker, a number of years ago while serving in an ecclesiastical position, the Christmas Eve day, a widow called me who had an adult single mother living with her, very concerned because now their toilet didn't work, and I was out in the field working colder than heck. Lander was really below zero. And I say, who do I call? So I had this neighbor done well in construction, just a good guy, just a Wyoming guy. And I call him and I say, I know you've got family that have come to visit. Can you go over and see what the problem is with their sewer? Goes over there. I get home Christmas Eve, one of those Christmas Eves where you're scrambling because it was during the weekday. And I got home and I went over to his house to see how that all went. Because I'd called him about 2 p.m. and he had just got home. It got into crawl space and found out that the section of pipe from the toilet down to the sewer has broken and a mess was everywhere. So he, being who he is, goes downtown, gets everything. Can you imagine those folks there? He gets all, laying in whatever it is, gets all of that put back together, makes these folks have a nice Christmas Eve and goes home. His family's all there visiting. And when I walked in, I asked how that went. And he was, he says it went good. It was a tough job, but he says, I think we've done a good job. A member of his family says, but we can't hardly even stand to have him in the room because he stinks. That's kind of the way I feel, you know? We've gone through this, and we've laid in this, and we've rolled in this, and we put this together, and there's a lot of opinions of how this should be, and I know that it comes with a little bit of an odor, but I will tell this body that I'm really proud of the work that we've done, and I think that it looks well into the future of where Wyoming should be and the direction that it wants to go. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just elaborate on a couple of things that I think we need to clarify a little bit, and then is and I struggle with the full-time employees. We have a budget amendment that everybody is, you know, beating the table. We want the governor to cut these positions. They don't have to be. We don't want people to be in them. We just want them cut. And then we come back and says, well, none of the positions we ever cut in the past had people in, so they don't count. So, you know, I don't know how you reconcile all of that. A full-time position is a full-time position, and if you reduce them, then you reduce the expanse of government. It's really that simple, and our net is at 26. We added about 107, and all of those that we reduced exceeds that, and we come down to about 26. And why did we grow? Because industry was demanding that we meet the needs of the expansion and the air quality, you know, the new requirements coming out of the federal government that allows them to get permits. We're supposed to respond to that. Which comes to the second point that I heard, that this is where we determine policies in our budget. No, that's completely backwards of proper role of government. We should define, through our efforts of defining what the policy should be, and then determine how you fund to support your policy. That's what gets us upside down, is when we react by responding to the budget. We should be fully engaged in developing what the policy should be on healthcare, on industry, on whatever it may be, and then we have to adjust our budget to do that. And if our budget won't fit, then we work around that. I think it was a great idea to simplify the budget, but I would suggest to you that it's not going to take an hour away from this process. We have to, I watched the Appropriations Committee haggle. I think the good representative here in Cheyenne that sits over here was witnessing that. We sat there and haggled over $7,000 with an agency for about 15 minutes in a $3.8 billion general fund dollar budget. We don't take it lightly. We heard some claim that the agency that moved people from nursing homes out of state really cut programs and didn't cut people. I would suggest that that's ignorance on the understanding of that agency, whose budget, 90% of the total budget goes out to the people.
What's your point?
Mr. Speaker, we probably shouldn't refer to our colleagues in using the context of ignorance.
That's
But
fair.
Pardon me?
That's fair.
Okay, but I just want to draw attention to the Red Book, the gift that you gave us. Rule number 35, let your discourse with men of business be short and comprehensive.
Well, he can probably go as long as he wants here. And this term ignorant, I will grant you, probably needs retracted. But other than that, we'll move on.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, but I think all of us make decisions on ignorance at times. I didn't call the individual ignorant. So I would get back to the point making that that agency, 90% of all of its budget goes out to people and to businesses in the state, not for people, full-time employees in the agency. Now, there was some concern about not spending, that we don't spend money with heart. As we reflect on actions yesterday, Mr. Chairman, where talking about a water tower up in Wheatland and yet feeling the appropriate way, we could have easily left this house yesterday. But because we're heartless, we decided to put $2 million in a couple of different places to allow that. Because we're heartless, we decided to make sure that funds that were one-time only to help people with disabilities and other things gets put back in and ensures that the businesses providing that will have security and the people receiving those services will have stability. I hope we'll work on that heartlessness, but I think for the most part, we do pretty good with that. I think that there was really a good point Mr. Chairman made by a good representative that suggested that in the future, we're going to have to consider change. I would just only suggest that considering change in the future is too late. We really need to be looking at how our tax structure is set, and because we repeatedly talk about putting money back into the pockets of the people, wherein I think we mistakenly confuse where the divisions of those two tax collections belong. Property tax is local, is governed by that, and we, for some reason, feel like we need to usurp their decision and then backfill any decisions we make with general funds that go to serve the other operations of state government. I think we need to do a better job at that. I think when we talk about the good citizens getting taxes back, we have no property tax. Look at all the tax exemptions. How many, and just want you to consider your various industries, how many of you had to pay sales tax on the equipment that you bought recently? Or feeds, or other things that we have exemptions for? That's putting money back into the pockets of the people. And we've done that, and we continue to do that. Don't know how stable that is in doing that. Mr. Chairman, the costs of doing business go up. I look at the vehicles that people drive down in the garage, and I'm going to suggest that the cost of that recent vehicle in the last 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years is significantly different than what it was otherwise. And I think when we as a state are buying vehicles, when we as the state are buying fuel, when we're buying the goods to do business, that we have to expect that the cost of business is going to go up. And so to somehow think that our overall state budget is not going to increase in 10 years, I think is a wonderful concept, but I just don't know how realistic it is. I think for the most of us people at home, our personal budgets, the cost of living day to day are going up. Do I recognize that we have citizens out there that are living on fixed incomes and don't have the ability to adjust that? Yes. And I think, as we adjust our heartless hearts, we need to try and figure out better ways to help them. Mr. Chairman, I also want to point out there was a comment, and I don't think, we need to take this home on Wyoming Home Services. That's fully funded in the budget. We didn't reduce that at all. In fact, so was one of those that we had to put back in. And there was a budget amendment to add in addition to that $1 million, which the Joint Conference Committee pulled out. I think that was just maybe a misunderstanding on the good representative's part on where that was, but we need to be able to go home and tell Wyoming Home Services that they're funded in the Department of Health's budget and that didn't change. Mr. Chairman, members of this body, love you. Thank you for all you do. I know that you all may have various opinions, but I want you to know that I have deep respect and reverence for this body and for this institution and for this state. And with that, I think everybody's got their bags packed. We're ready to go home, and maybe we can take a vote.
Well, not so fast, even after this one, it looks like. But anyway, we are voting on Joint Conference Committee number 2 on House Bill 1. A majority of the elected members is required to adopt the report. The chief clerk will please call the roll.
Allemand? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Klauston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Hornock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Oakley? Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez-Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Zwanitzer Dan? Zwanitzer Dave? Speaker Summers? Are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 41 aye, 21 no.
By your vote, you have adopted Joint Conference Committee number 2 on House Bill 1. Congratulations. And And regardless of how you voted on the budget, I would like everybody to stand and give our Appropriations Committee another round of applause. I need Representative Western up here for a second, and yeah. Would Representatives Larson, Lloyd, and Crago come to the front? Boy, they're in trouble now, aren't they? All right, so I'm going to appoint some conference committees now before we break for dinner, so, so we have it. So on Senate File 132, the conference committee will be Nicholas Chair, Stiff, and Sherwood. On Senate File 75, the water bill, Craigo Chair, Larson Lloyd, Nyman. On Senate File 54, which was, I'm sure that's imprinted in your memory. It'll be Stiff Chair, Craigo Store. On Senate File 118, be Western Chair, Conrad Haroldson. And so with that, I think Mr. Majority Floor Leader will take a couple-hour break and come back and let those, okay, Chairman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Joint Conference Committee on House Bill 166 will meet at 1:30 in room 110. So that's on the first floor of the Capitol, west side, and it will be on 110.
Sounds good. Mr. Majority Floor Leader?
Mr. Speaker, I move the House stand in recess until 2 p.m.
Any other committee announcements or JCC announcements? What's that? All right, you've heard the Majority Floor Leader's motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. We stand in recess until 2 p.m.